comfort food.
Absolutely.
Hello.
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 Welcome. Greetings.
My name's Joe. I'm trying to hit up like pretty much all the philosophy groups on Meetup. I'm really interested in philosophy. So I guess before we get started in the discussion, are there any people that went to school or have a degree in philosophy here?
So hi, my name is Gabby. I'm new here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm still having some issues with technology here. I'm not exactly the most tech-savvy person in the world. Well, I do have a minor in philosophy. That's pretty much the only academic claim I can do when it comes to philosophy. I'm just like interested and, just honoring what the word philosopher means. And like, I'm a lover of the truth. And nowadays we live in a post-truth reality. I think it's interesting. I feel like going back to philosophy has become increasingly important, at least to me.
Right. I was just asking because I might have questions after, unrelated to the discussion after the discussion. So that's why I was trying to see. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, the discussion last week on webs was so successful, we're doing it again this week. Kenneth Smith's parables, paradigms, paradoxes. Mostly, I think last week we only got through 2 of them, if that, 1.5 maybe. But that's because these pieces are so dense, they're so densely packed. You can talk a lot about the implications of them. You can spend a whole session just talking about one of them, if you wanted to. There's a lot of philosophical implications in every line, every paragraph of those. Yeah, as I was saying before, the 2 books that we're talking about are Otherwise and Webs. Otherwise, which is an interesting title the more you think about it. Otherwise, what would that be? Other than wise, something, or wisdom in an other vein. Wisdom, something other than conventional wisdom, something other than what is commonly assumed as wisdom, or maybe it's other. Yeah, other than what you expected. Other, or which itself leads to the idea, well, how many wisdoms are there? How many types of wisdoms are there? You know, is wisdom a universalized thing, or is something wise to one person and is a completely different reality to someone else, and so on and so on. Just an interesting, intriguing title. The other one is Webs. We talked last week. Webs of what? Webs of cultural, social, mental, psychological, emotional, personal, spiritual, threads and nettings, the webs and traps that we find ourselves embedded in. These things rarely get questioned, so that's an interesting title for a book, and so on and so on. So actually, of the 2, I prefer Webs. Webs is a longer book. but I think there's more depth to that one as well. Although, if you ask him, Kenneth says you should read them sequentially, because the 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 uh, the concepts that he prepares and otherwise build your brain and lay the groundwork for what's to come in webs, and step by step, piece by piece, he's very slowly unlocking a series of trip locks that each build on each other. That's what he says anyway. Actually, so these were not printed by a established publishing company, which is why you will not find them on Amazon. The only way you can acquire paper copies of these books, well, basically you'd have to go through me or Rick, but probably me. That's basically, yeah, the only way to do it, because he self-published these. He put up the money for himself to print these and get these published, and they can be yours. I'm not sure what his current asking price is, but he published these around the turn of the century, I think 99, 2000, and copies can be had, but you're just not going to find them on Amazon. So if you do want to acquire these, let me know, because I think they're wonderful, and beautiful covers. You can see that. Very nicely printed, and well illustrated throughout. Didn't want to turn this into an advertisement, but I just like how pretty it is. So, and he did the artwork for the covers. I don't have the other one here, but that's his artwork there. It's just a two-tone. So, the idea is to go through some of these. If anybody has any favorites, or if you have the document up and running, that you see anything, let's see if there's anybody who has any of the ones that stands out for anybody, that anybody would like to cover, because we got a long time here. And I'll open.
I could
don't
start.
have it open yet.
Why not?
Okay.
So last time we covered 1 and 3, and we sort of dabbled with 5, but we didn't really go into it. But we might back up and do 2, and then 4, unless people have other things that they want to do, because they both introduce themes that are very important to Smith. And 2 is, short, as the best aphorisms are. It is as compact as he could make it, and yet it's just full of goodies. It's a good illustration of the way that he's sort of following in the footsteps of Nietzsche and Aristotle and others, of trying to make these truly potent little logic bombs, as he calls them. The part that I have never tracked down, but maybe somebody on this call will, is why it's named Fata Morgana. I mean, Fata is fate, but what's Morgana in this case? And what's it a reference to? He is certainly quoting something, and I don't know what it is. But the rest of it I understand. And this is a mock definition of thinking, which he says, thinking is calling into conscious play the simplisms and linearities interwoven in the process of miscomprehension. And part of what he's nailing here is the way that we take thinking for granted. We think when we're thinking, we're doing something objective and productive, and that it's some kind of natural process of the brain that leads us to the truth. Now, unless we're philosophers, unless we've really critiqued the way that we put information together to reach conclusions, we're liable to assume that what we're doing when we think is very natural. And part of what he's getting at in Webs, which is why this is his second parable in Webs, is that almost nothing we do when we're trying to think, especially as moderns, counts as natural. We've been heavily programmed culturally and through PR and other means to tell us how to think and what counts as thinking, and what are good conclusions to reach and what are good suppositions to begin from. And as a result, a lot of it is designed not to lead us to the truth, but to lead us away from the truth. There is a quote from E.R. Beadle that Kenneth quotes frequently, although it's not right here. He's clearly referring to it, which is that half the work that's done in this world is to make things appear other than they actually are. And that's, Smith's commentary on that quote is it's almost certainly gone up as a percentage since Beadle wrote that quote. Because the 20th century saw the invention of public relations, spin doctoring, and all of these other things. So by the time we find ourselves in media res in the middle of our lives trying to think about things, we've already had our minds so completely formatted that the outcomes of much of our attempts to think about things are predetermined, and not predetermined by us, but predetermined by the people who gave us this anti-culture that we're marinating in. So when he's referring to simplisms and linearities, he's talking about the fact that the way that we think trains us to oversimplify the things that we're looking at and to think in little rabbit trails of thought that have been laid out for us so that they feel comfortable. It's like this is how thinking works. And yet, ironically, the result is not comprehension, but miscomprehension by design. So yes, thinking you're thinking. Daniel, that's right. We have enormous assumptions about what we're doing when we're thinking, but above all, we think that we're thinking. And he puts the quotes around it to call it into question. He's like, just because we call it thinking doesn't mean we're actually doing what, say, Aristotle recognized as thinking.
Well,
So I looked up Fata Morgana on that magic little phone thing that we all carry. And there's a movie by Werner Herzog, a documentary.
I've got it. It's on Wikipedia. Fata Morgana, Italian, is a superior mirage seen in a narrow band right above the horizon, named after the Arthurian sorceress Morgan Le Fay. Belief that these images were fairy castles of air or false land by her witchcraft to lure sailors to their death. So a mirage, but even a malevolent mirage specifically. So
it steers us off course.
And it was a film by Werner Herzog, which probably used that definition to inform it.
I love it.
So I think, you would start to think, well, what is the mirage? Is it a self-generated mirage? Is it coming from our own thinking? Is it coming from our enculturation, our indoctrination? Is it coming from genetics? Our belief system, emotional commitments, psychological disposition. But something's creating the illusion. One of my favorites in here, I don't know if we have it in one of these documents, but the idea that thinking is in itself a cure. Really, thinking is just drawing the knot tighter. Thinking is just convincing yourself of what you already want to believe. It's very rare that thinking actually cuts through your belief system. Then he says, medice cura te ipsos, doctor, cure yourself.
Let me find that one. Yeah.
Could I interject?
Yeah.
So just a little background to explain where I'm coming from. This, I'm originally from Brazil and moved to United States, Seattle specifically, back in 2001. And one of the things that I've observed, I was already an adult, like a young adult, but an adult nevertheless. So already embedded in one type of culture. So just having that view from someone like seeing the American culture, or at least the culture in Seattle, just can't speak for the whole country, noticing the differences and things like that. And one of the things that I've observed a lot with some of my friends is just that what I've always perceived as the illusion of independent thinking. And maybe that's something that is related to the Fata Morgana, is that it is an illusion. Like, our thoughts are not independent. They've been primed regardless of where you come from, whatever place in the world. And maybe that's the benefit of being exposed to different cultures and different perspectives, is just the expansion of what we perceived as truth. More often than not, we're somewhat delusional. We have all sorts of beliefs that are not the truth. And we become very, very emotionally attached to these perceptions. So yeah, I'm just kind of like, because I would tell my friends, it's just like, I think it's just a fallacy to think that like you're an independent thinker. You're constantly bombarded by biases. It's just perhaps just being more mindful of it, and just kind of stepping back and trying to look back to the threads, going back to the webs part, of just kind of like, oh, okay, maybe where is this kind of belief is coming from? Why I'm more emotionally inclined to favor this type of thinking than this other type of thinking. So.
Yeah, this whole book is definitely about this theme that you're bringing up here. This is what he had in mind. That, and the Fata Morgana sort of, now that I understand the references, is clearly creating that sense that the landscape of the mind that we're navigating, an enormous percentage of the landmarks aren't really there. They've been manufactured for us to lead us into traps. So we think that we're freely choosing among these 6 choices, but maybe out of those choices, all 6 of them are not true. And so it doesn't really matter which one we pick, as long as we're stuck in that mode. Kenneth Smith comes back over and over to the importance of escaping this trap requires getting new perspectives. The perspective that you have from changing from Brazil to Seattle is a classic example of one of the things that Kenneth Smith advocates. It's like, to see things through the eyes of different cultures gives you the ability to see what's different and what's the same, and to begin to question things that previously we had no choice but to take for granted.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much information about how what we believe and what we think. We think that that's our mind telling us that that's what we think and that's what we believe, but that's really an illusion. What we think and what we believe is really so much emotionally connected. It's from the way you were raised, from your childhood, from television, your parents, your teachers, the way you were programmed by your society. And it's impossible. There are many articles written about how it's entirely impossible to change anyone's mind, politically, religiously, or anything that you have a hardwired belief to. Even evidence will not do anything except reinforce your pre-existing beliefs. You can't change your beliefs through rational thinking. It's always got to be an emotional change, because why you believe what you believe is not through rational thinking. You think it is, but that's an illusion. It's an emotional commitment. Okay, Joe has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question. What was his worldview? What was Kenneth Smith's worldview? Was he an existentialist? Because the quote or the line here seems to suggest there's like an implicit premise that there would be some sort of objective truth to get at, right?
Yeah, he has another parable elsewhere. It might be in Minotaur, his 3rd book, which is under development, which says there's really only 2 kinds of philosophy: existentialist or escapist. He says same with religion. So he's an existentialist, but he was a philosophy professor, and so his approach to this is a little different than most philosophers. He's not just advocating a position. He's really like Gabi sort of implied, he's advocating really mastering multiple perspectives and learning how to fluently shift between them so that you're not trapped by any one perspective. That is, he's not promoting an ideology. He's trying to mostly promote how do you know when you're in an ideology and what are the different methods you can use to get out of it and to look at things differently. And so to that end, what he used to do in his classes, and someday I hope we can get him onto one of these seminars so that he'll do it for us. What he used to do in his classes for his students was they could pick a subject and pick two philosophers, and he would debate that subject from the perspective of those two philosophers. And he'd make them yell at each other and argue and tell them why they're wrong and why they're right. And his goal in that was to really be Descartes arguing with Hegel, for example, about the possibility of knowledge. So it kind of, when you talk about his perspective and kind of what his orientation is even though he's got one, his key orientation is that we need a lot of perspectives.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I had a follow-up question, but it can wait till the end of the discussion.
This is what I'm hearing. There's you're sort of bandying about the term knowledge and belief. And, in this age of facts and false facts and news and fake news, you know what you know and you know what you don't know, right? There was like a meme on Philosophy Matters on Facebook that had a big pie chart that was what you know and what you don't know and what you know you don't know. And I mean, beliefs seem to me to be floofy. That's a really great term. So here he's saying, calling into conscious play the simplisms and linearities interwoven in the processes of miscomprehension. So it sounds like he's going back to how you comprehend something. That's where the problem is. That's where you're miscomprehending it. And then you create simplisms and linearities from the miscomprehension. So we're starting from a place of not facts, but miscomprehensions. And then we're building from that simplisms and linearities. Simple linearities, I'm thinking, are equations in our head between one thing and another, and that basically from the very beginning we are either filtering or not perceiving completely what is around us. And then whatever we build from that is faulty at some level. But it's all a game, right? And you're trying, I'm a Unitarian, everybody's trying to find the truth. And we're all sort of playing within our own neuroses, trying to find that truth. So it's sort of compare and contrast, listen to this philosopher, listen to that one, take something from here, something from there. And that's the best you can do. Laissez-faire.
Certainly much of what you've said, it lines up with what he's kind of proposing in these. The key issue, I think, the reason why he put webs as the title and why he references linearities here, since webs are made out of threads which are linear, is that we try to solve the problems of the world by thinking about them. because we think that when we're thinking, we're in our own most safe private place where our judgment is least compromised. And then based on our thoughts, we decide what actions to take. But what he's arguing is that we have to be careful because we've already been formatted, and a great deal of the thinking that we think is novel to us and that we think we're doing freely is actually pre-constrained by the way that we've been formatted by the culture. And so if we want to be able to become free thinkers and really look at the world objectively, there's two big things we have to do. And one of them is we just have to learn not to trust what comes naturally to us in our thinking, because we're not able to distinguish thinking from rationalization. To what extent are we genuinely challenging our ideas, and to what extent are we merely bolstering them with cheap arguments and oversimplifications to prevent ourselves from having to think something new? So that's one of the things, and that it's like that problem, knowing the enemy's half the battle. If you understand that the thing we take for granted and trust for granted is problematic, then at least we know to turn and look at it and question it and say, oh yeah, how do you know? Why should that be so? And then the other half is, if we can't be absolutely certain about our own thinking, it encourages us to look elsewhere. We want to meet new people, explore new perspectives. We want to read writers from different cultures and different eras who had different assumptions than we do, and we want to get out into the world directly, unmediated by our language and our logic and our formatting, and let the world tell us things. This is he's got a lot of criticism for science the way it exists in the modern world, but the idea of science, of letting the world speak to you and disprove your hypotheses is also pretty central here, because the world doesn't have an agenda, unlike all the people in it.
Yeah. No, it's interesting you're saying this. Let me, I kind of want to play devil's advocate a little bit here, because as much as I enjoy and agree with this, I can feel emotionally responding positively to what you're saying. There's a part of me that just kind of wonders, like, okay, where it gets to the point where it just becomes some kind of like moral relativism, where people just kind of start lacking conviction, because at some point you want to have exposure to that kind of knowledge, right? What do you do with that knowledge? How do you act into the world with that knowledge? And when you're just constantly like, well, but then there's this part here, and then there's this culture that thinks this other way. And then, it comes just kind of like a analysis paralysis type of situation. And then, then you see a lot of people just having like these weird, like flimsy perception. Again, just kind of going to this kind of moral relativism, and I think that then it's like shadow manifests itself with some kind of like, okay, I might put myself in hot waters here, but I'm just going to say like reductio ad absurdum, that I see a lot of like a social justice movement nowadays, and as a minority myself, there's, of course, I'm sympathetic to a lot of that stuff, but the others, I'm just like, okay, this is bonkers now. Okay, where do we draw the line? Where do we go? Like, like what Aristotle says, that like, every virtue in its excess becomes a vice. At some point, there has to be a line. We're just like, okay, too much of this now.
Gabby, would you say that in order to have a robust worldview, you would need like a robust metaphysic, epistemology, and ethic, right? So when you say reductio ad absurdum, you're talking about the people that pay lip service to moral relativism, yet continue to make moral statements like oppressing the minority is wrong. So that's what you mean, is that what you mean, is that you're using these things that you say you don't believe in? Is that what you mean when you say reductio ad absurdum?
I think both are problematic. Because then it's just like the mindset starts becoming somewhat cultish, that, when people are, let me see how I can articulate this. I think it's important to be exposed to new cultures and to understand that there is value in different ways of perceiving the world. At the same time, but then when you start assigning the same value to every single view of everything, that I don't think that is right. You know,
Yeah, neither does Kenneth Smith.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, so where do we establish that line? You know, because truth to be told, like human beings are somewhat hierarchical.
Yes.
You know, I'm being somewhat is like I'm being very generous here.
That's
Like
the
very
definition
hierarchical.
of moral relativism, Gabby.
Yeah.
What you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, he argues that the modern world, the modern epoch, the anti-culture, the worldwide anti-culture that's developed and is sort of destroying traditional indigenous cultures around the world, is founded on nihilism. They sort of evacuated all the fundamental sources of meaning and values that existed in prior epochs and replaced it with whatever people decide to do is ipso facto good, which really turns pretty quickly into might makes right. Whatever a majority can foist on a minority, whatever a powerful minority can foist on the majority, and all of that stuff lends itself to relativism, nihilism, all the things you're talking about are great hazards. And it's a danger when we start questioning the fundamental principles of right and wrong. He argues it has to be done, but it's a danger because you don't want to slip into becoming what the sophists did in ancient Greece, where
God, yes.
they
Yeah.
bragged about their ability to make the worst look like the better and to make evil look like good, and that they could teach you how to do it. You know, that was their thing. And in many ways, they were sort of prototypical moderns in that regard, right? Because isn't this what PR and advertising is about? Is this thing may give you cancer, but we're going to convince you it's going to make you healthy, and we can do it really well. There's this danger.
Rick,
And I
wouldn't
see
that
too much of that, too much sophistry out there, and it's terrifying. You know. So my question again: how do we establish that? Like, how we come up with that? Is just by living life? Is that the true aspect of wisdom, of just being mindful and observing our world? And you know what I mean? I feel like I'm actually failing to articulate my idea here.
I think you're articulating it well. I know what you're saying. So there's a framework for understanding the world that the ancient Greeks proposed and that Hegel and Kierkegaard and Hannah Arendt and others have proposed, including Kenneth Smith. And it's based on the idea that if we're looking for sources of information, we're inclined, especially as moderns, to get stuck between our feelings on the one hand, what we want, and our ideas on the other hand. And many people think that one or the other is right. Some people think it's somewhere in between or some kind of mix. But this idea of kind of reducing the full scope of the complexity of the world into this simple spectrum between what do I want and what do I think. And the Greeks thought that people who are trapped in those two modes of thought are dangerous because they can't find the real principles that all ethics and laws ought to be based on. They believed that those principles that tell us how we ought to behave are not just about how we feel, and they're not just about the idea systems and how we think, but that they're to be found in nature itself. Nature can teach us, if we study it the right way, how to develop ethical systems and to treat each other correctly. And the hazard of the modern world, which was critiqued by Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and others, is that it denies the existence of principles and says there's really only what you want and your systems of thought and organization for getting it. And there's nothing else. And as long as you're stuck at that level, the Greek critique is moral relativism becomes the hazard. Nihilism becomes the hazard because you no longer have a frame of reference. You know, in the ancient world, they thought nature was the source of those principles. In the medieval world, they thought God was the source of those principles. But, you know, the medieval world overturned the ancient world and put nature under God and man. And then the modern world overturned the medieval world and put God underneath. So really it's just man on top. And so we're stuck between our wants and our thoughts. And as a result, as long as we stay at that level, these questions are unresolvable.
Yeah, and soon enough, there's going to be machines above men.
Well, the machines are the perfection of our systems of ideas.
Yeah.
So this is, you know, and I don't mean that they're good. I just mean, you know, as far as completely divorcing them, both from principles and from our feelings, you can program a machine to follow any set of rules.
Yeah. Now it's interesting. I was actually having that conversation with my partner before this. It's just like because I think it kind of falls back to the idea of personal responsibility, and human beings are just so ever eager to outsource not only our thinking, but just our way of living to something else. It's either to God or to government or to machines or to some charismatic leader, because the concept of personal responsibility is just too heavy to carry around. But it seems that towards like in the end, that's what we need to do.
So I,
Yep.
I didn't want to derail the conversation with ethics, but I think the arguments for moral relativism are incredibly bad. But I think non-cognitivism, which is whether or not what is good is truth apt. I think that's a whole nother story. When you're dealing with non-cognitivists, I think they have a pretty robust um, they can falsify, or they have falsified the term, or the ontological status and the epistemic status of good is not having any properties. We can't sense it with sense data. But even Wittgenstein, a non-cognitivist like Wittgenstein, agreed that we could still have relative value judgments that can be restated as facts. Like, for example, this road is the right road if you want to be at that place by a certain time. So you could that seems perfectly fine if you want to run a society. I don't think non-cognitivism stops you from having a society per se.
Are you familiar with Zeno's paradox?
No.
So Zeno was a student of Parmenides, ancient Greek philosopher, part of the Eleatic school. And Parmenides was obsessed with the Greek language and its perfection. And he thought that since Greek had a verb for to be in a permanent sense, that meant that the cosmos must also support infinite existence. And he set out to prove that things could exist without changing and without ever having come into creation or ever being destroyed. And in the end, he wasn't able to do it except by denying the existence of all change or motion. And since anybody can look around themselves and see things changing and moving all the time, to defend this position, he and his students set about to create logical paradoxes and traps that they would fling at anybody who tried to point out how stupid the idea is that nothing changes. So Zeno, one of his classic paradoxes, in an attempt to destroy the ability to disprove the existence of eternity, he said, look, not only you think that you're moving, you think that you're changing, but you're not, and I can prove that you can't. He says you can't even take a step. You only think you're taking a step. And the evidence is, for you to take a step to cross a certain distance, first you'd have to cross half that distance. But wait, you can't even cross half that distance because before you can cross that, you have to cross half of that distance. And he shows that there's an infinity of halves, and nobody can cross an infinity, so therefore you can't take a step. Now, to us, right, it sounds absurd. But to the way that the conversations that Parmenides got people into worked, it was a logical trap. And it seemed to show that you could, using the system of ideas, demonstrate that what is apparent to us is nevertheless not true and not real. And Plato was heavily influenced by Parmenides and Zeno and the rest. So the challenge is when people attempt to disprove the existence of principles and ethics and suggest that it's all relative, most of the arguments come down to some flavor of Zeno's paradox. They're attempts to exclude parts of reality, like, for example, the parts we can't measure, and say, well, if we don't have tools good enough to measure this thing, then it must not exist at all. And so therefore, it's not real except in some kind of relative sense. And the danger of that, we know from the history of science, is that we're constantly improving our tools of measurement and gaining the ability to measure things we couldn't previously measure. So just because we can't measure something now is absolutely no guarantee that it doesn't exist and that we won't be able to measure it tomorrow.
And couldn't you make a reductio ad absurdum and say, hey, look, science uses, epistemology uses value judgments like consistency, accuracy, what's it, coherence, things like that. Those are value judgments, right? So I think that's that's like what the moral realist would say to somebody that doubts value judgments because you can't measure them.
That's right. Even the systems of thought that are used to attempt to disprove the possibility of ethics themselves use value judgments to do it. It's
Exactly.
it's everywhere around us. So we might argue about what the principles ought to be, or what the ethics ought to be, or what right and wrong are, but any attempt to deny their existence can't be done without calling them into service.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's here, and that's implicit, and that goes to Gabby's point, right? That the Greeks were not, by and large, the Greeks weren't moral relativists until the emergence of sophistry. And the emergence of sophistry was only a short time before the complete collapse of Greek civilization, because the point at which people begin to deny right and wrong and that anything really matters, as soon as they start to slip into nihilism and relativism, it's not long before they're cutting each other's throats and collapsing into civil war, which is exactly what happened.
Something for us to look forward to. We should start like preparing ourselves, watching like what is the name with that movie with Mel Gibson? My goodness, tip of my tongue.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
this post-apocalyptic worlds and things like that, because it's coming.
Mad Max.
Exactly, Mad Max.
But the alternative is one can push back against it and assert the importance of ethics and principles, and develop that theory and promulgate it. We don't have to just give in to nihilism and relativism just because that's what they want.
Yeah, but when it comes to like Western civilization, is that just kind of like the herald of what is coming?
Certainly, one of the themes that comes out in these parables over and over is that modernism would like us to accept that it's inevitable and that it's the end of history. I mean, how many people have seen that illustration of supposedly of evolution, showing the great march of progress from fishes to straight white cis European men, right, as the pinnacle of evolution? This was promulgated all over the place. It's like the theory is that nothing exists except that it leads to us, who are now able to conquer the world. And of course, in hindsight, it looks ridiculous. We can see the arrogance of it, and the speaking of simplisms, breaking down the complex networks and bushes of evolution into a little simple line, with the end written where we are, and A+ and halos, and we're number one. It's absurd, right? It can't stand on its own. It's just a ridiculous caricature. And the more you point out the absurdity of it, the harder it is for people to take it seriously. And so these days, hardly anyone in the evolutionary biology community subscribes to that idea, whereas 100 years ago, almost everybody in the evolutionary biological community subscribed to it. So it's possible to transform at a really deep value people's basic conception of how the world works. And the same can be done with nihilism. Nihilism, relativism, these things are self-contradictory and intensely destructive. And you find that they tend to cluster around as rationalizations by the biggest criminals, who say, it's okay that I do this because none of you matter. Only I matter because I say so, right? And the more you point it out, how ridiculous it is, the more it weakens their argument and strengthens the argument for why we ought to work together to figure out what matters in the world.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I was watching a video like from Alain de Botton, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but because he's British, but his last name is French. But like he made a video on School of Life in favor of just some kind of like positive nihilism. That I don't know. I tried to watch it, and I could feel like every fiber of my being just kind of like bristling. It's just like, and I kind of like him in a lot of stuff, but it's just like, no, dude, you should not be. I don't know. I am against the concept of censorship in the first place. At the same time, there's a part of me that has real issues with like certain ideas that I think that they're more toxic, as seductive as it can be. And that's the problem, is that they tend to be very seductive. But I don't know. I just like, I look at the end game and just does not bode well. I don't know. I feel like I'm more ranting than anything else here. So
Right.
please, someone else, just stop me.
if I can engage in some sophistry here for a second,
Yeah, go for it.
I don't like the positive nihilism. I would actually like to refute them substantively, but I'm not prepared to do that. But I think there's a psychological pool for this sort of behavior, saying you don't care but still engaging in moral behavior, or saying life is meaningless but there's meaning to be had in poetry or whatever. I think it's absolutely incoherent to say and do things like that, but I don't know. That's
Here,
just
here.
There's this Nietzsche quote, and I mention it every week because it's so apt, and that's that Nietzsche said philosophy is only for the healthy, because the sick it's only ever made sicker. And if you once you start getting into questioning ethics and values and the rest of it, if you are cognitively perverse, if you're predatory, you can tie yourself and other people in knots and try to get them to all buy into your bullshit through really sophisticated argument that you've learned at the hands of sophists. But how do you refute that? And you can refute it partly by trying to really point out the absurdity and the ridiculousness of it, but part of it is by appealing to life, which was one of the things that Nietzsche did a lot. He's like, does this make us healthier or does this make us sicker? And if we're all thinking that nothing matters except, who can we kill and take their stuff, that makes us sicker. And a lot of people will respond to the argument, no, I don't want to live in a world like that. It's like part of how you're on the trail of the fundamental principles in ethics is that if you disregard them, we get into trouble. And if we follow them, it seems to lead us out of trouble. So the idea that we should respect other human life is partly there because what's the alternative? If we're not respecting other people's lives, then why should they respect our lives? And now we're all in trouble. Certainly there's an ethical claim being made here in parable number 2, right? He's saying genuine thinking is important and necessary, and that it's dangerous when we mistake fake thinking, shallow, self-justifying rationalization and programming. When we mistake that for real thinking, we're in trouble because it means we're not genuinely free and we're not able to find our way out of problems like this. So Gabby, you weren't on last week. One of the metaphors that Kenneth Smith uses elsewhere is the idea that you could think about the mind the way we think about the rest of the body, as having muscles and bones and joints and articulation and an ability. You could think about it like your eyes and your head, your ability to look around and see things. And if you use that as a metaphor, the way that we're born, the mind prefers to look outward and to just take for granted what's inside. So if we want something, it must be important, because we don't turn around to ask ourselves, well, why should it be important just because I want it? Which is naturally, the baby wants what the baby wants, at a young age. And the same goes when we get older. We start thinking things we take for granted that whatever we're thinking must be legitimate. That must be us thinking. It couldn't be something programmed into us. And so he says part of the art of becoming philosophical is doing something very contranatural, but that's really important, which is that you dislocate the joint of your mind so that it can turn all the way back around and look at itself. And all that scrutiny that we normally reserve for other people and the things outside ourselves, we can start to direct at ourselves and go, oh, maybe I don't have to think that way. Maybe I don't have to do that just because I feel that. Maybe there are other ways to look at the world. We gain this incredible freedom of thought and sort of capacity to expand our range of choices once we put ourselves into the mix of things that it's okay to think about and critique and make choices about.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because like in Western civilizations, we would just consider that like the practice of contemplation, while Eastern civilizations would see more as meditation, the practice of meditation, which is something that in the world that we live in has, I think it's really interesting because like I'm in the mental health field, and mindfulness is just the latest, you know, like craze. Everybody's just like, you gotta be mindful. It was like, yeah, it makes perfect sense considering, you know, how mindless people, you know, have been in the last, I would say 20 years, and I'm being charitable here. You know, like I saw so much of the, when it comes to pop culture, like, yeah, a couple of decades back, just the rise of like zombie movies, zombie shows, zombie this, zombie that. And then suddenly there's just this whole thing about mindfulness. It's like, yeah, because like the zombies were basically the metaphor, you know, the myth that people were living. And it's just all about consuming and doing nothing, you know, just brains, just consume like locusts. And then suddenly it's just like, oh, okay, we need that. It's just because we're not given the time to just be. Like, we're constantly reacting to things. And but I wonder if there is actually some kind of like objective separation between just contemplation of just contemplating things, or in meditation itself, you know, because I think in both cases, like, you still create that distancing from one's own thoughts, and just observing. It's like, oh, I am thinking this. And just kind of like having this meta relationship with one's own thinking.
Yeah, yeah. Kenneth Smith critiques this a lot. The one of the great problems of modernism is that it attempts to accelerate the pace of life to a point where you don't ever have the opportunity to sit back and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Do I actually like what's going on? You know, as long as you stay moment to moment, race, pay the bills, do the work, you lose the space that's required to look inside yourself, even to look outside yourself, you know, outside of the routine that you're caught up in, the busyness of it all. And you know, this isn't just the last couple decades. You know, decade by decade, modernism tries to perfect itself by becoming more busy and more full of distractions. But, you know, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Hegel, you know, we're talking centuries back. People were already criticizing the way the modern age is very different from earlier ages, in that it encourages people to accept things as they seem, and then it manipulates the way they seem and keeps us busy.
And if you're experiencing distress, just take some meds so you don't have to feel the pain.
Brave New World. Have some Soma.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to ask you guys, since I'm a noob here, and I feel like I don't want to take the air out of the room. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'm very excited about it. I'm enjoying this. I was wondering if like Eastern philosophies are brought up here as well, because I'm not really familiarized with them at all.
Yeah, it comes up a fair amount. He's got, there's one of the parables in the set's called Satori, and it's about how, you know, the Zen master treats the Zen student who uses his head like a thing, like an object, and how he thwacks him on the head to remind him, no, you shouldn't do that. You should be more meditative. You should be more mindful. And he says, you know, the same could readily be applied to, you know, people who aren't Zen students but are running around in the world being busy all the time and not paying attention to, is, you know, should I stop and actually reflect on whether any of this is good, and should I be doing something different? And if they can't bring themselves to create that space, he says, there too, a thwack on the head could be highly therapeutic. It's like, you're not an object, you're supposed to be a person. Yeah, it comes up. It comes up. His main focus is the European existentialist, but he'll draw from any source that contributes to that. And so there's a certain amount of Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu and others who come up from time to time in these discussions.
Cool, thank you.
He was actually the one who turned me on to Chuang Tzu. I'd been reading Lao Tzu in Tao Te Ching since I was little, but I'd somehow missed Chuang Tzu. And you know, there's obviously this whole body of Taoist literature out there to be explored.
Yeah, I'm trying to familiarize myself with some of that stuff, but I feel like I wonder if I don't know if I have enough wisdom yet to understand every single thing that is there, or if I'm just too trapped into my monkey mind and trying to see things from just too much of an intellectual mindset and less from a like experiential and even emotional thing too. And I think that one of the, at least my intuition when I get exposed to some of like Eastern philosophies is that it feels like Eastern philosophers actually do value the experiential aspects more than Western philosophies. We spend a lot of time in our heads as like rationality just being the ultimate virtue. While it seems that Eastern philosophies just tap into these other filters that we use to perceive the world, like just, you know, like physical experiences and emotional experiences as well.
Yeah, certainly one of the premises of this parable is you know, when your brain is the problem, you're not going to find the solution with more braining. You know, it's like that's you got to be able to
True.
step out of it and get more reality injected into the situation. When it comes to, you know, depth of learning, one of the things that he talks about, which is also what my traditional Okinawan karate studies focus on, is that everybody's a student. Everybody's got to learn. Nobody's at the end. Nobody ever gets to the end. We're you know, our lives are too short. We're ephemeroi, like Homer said. We're creatures of a season. So, you know, the point is to move forward from where we are, and to wherever you are, there are places to go next where you can move forward. So one of the ways he used to do the philosophy classes was people could bring up any topic they wanted to, whatever was concerning them, whether it was on the curriculum or not. And no matter what it was, there was philosophy to be had there. You could use anything as a starting point. And the same thing happens in traditional karate studies. You know, the black belt lessons also begin with wherever the black belt is stuck, just like the white belt lessons begin with wherever the white belt is stuck. The thing that's motivating you, the thing you can't get past, is a perfectly fine place to begin.
Which I think it brings up. I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, it just makes me wonder. You know, perhaps what one of the things that we need right now is just to be more charitable with people's mistakes, because the whole point of like the process of learning is making mistakes. You can't learn something without making mistakes. And I think that just kind of the prevailing culture nowadays, it has again, like kind of like that, the more technology we have, the more we try to perceive each other as machines of just like, oh, we're supposed to be perfect and act in perfect ways, which is kind of like a puritanical thing, in my opinion. And while the human experience, if we're going to be learning in every single thing we're going to be doing in our lives, like the premise of being a student is that we're going to make mistakes. There's no escaping that.
Right, and where the praise comes in is in acknowledging that we're going to make mistakes, and then when we do, working them, using those mistakes, exploring them, you know, and studying them so that we can grow. But of course, as you say, in a culture, a machine-like culture, where you're encouraged to not make mistakes ever, since that's impossible for human beings, what it does is it creates a culture of deception in which people work as hard as they can to cover up their mistakes and pretend that they never happened. You know, to rationalize, to misrepresent, to kind of create this false image of themselves as perfect, in order to justify not ever having to grow or change. It's a hazard.
Could I
Go
I'm
ahead,
sorry.
Joe.
Could I take a few minutes and just ask a rather long question? It's gonna involve a quote from the article, but I think that one could say that that existentialists are are also offenders of making simplisms and linearities. And if I could quote an article here, and I'll link it if anybody wants to read it. But this is, if I could read this for a few minutes, little while here. Existentialism is not metaphysical truth, but people can be of a nature such that they are inclined to ethically aspire to it. This has grave implications because existentialism and ethic of personal responsibility appeal to some people due to their nature. those people embrace existentialism and personal responsibility and expect others to do so. Their existentialism, by definition, precludes them from recognizing or acknowledging that non-existentialists are not of a nature such that they can embrace or practice existentialism. And then it goes on. So it would appear that I guess to me, I don't necessarily believe this because it seems to psychologize all existentialists as having this feature. But it could be said that some existentialists have this sort of judgmental attitude about other people. But you really shouldn't be judgmental if you think that whether or not somebody becoming an existentialist is based on their nature, which is out of their control, right? I don't know if I read that coherently enough to make that. What do you guys think? Or I can read more if you guys want to.
Well, I understand what the author is saying, but it's not clear what alternative the author is proposing. They seems to be suggesting that we should all just live and let live. You know, if some people want to round people up into death camps and kill them, who are we to judge them? Judgment's bad. We shouldn't have values and make value judgments. Now, certainly value judgments can be and are a hazard, certainly the way that people apply them. But to try to solve that problem by avoiding value judgments just sets us up to be the onlookers at the next Holocaust, who then afterwards, like the 1930s Germans, have to explain why they just sat by and let things happen. It's like, well, I didn't want to judge because judging's bad. The world that results if we don't have the courage to seek out ethical principles and to insist upon them is an inhumane machine world that results in catastrophe. So the first part I would go at is questioning the idea that it's good to avoid value judgments. Certainly, if the response to value judgments is, well, then damn them all to hell for all time, there's different ways you can respond to a judgment. Some people think that a judgment means, that sort of religious, apocalyptic, torture for eternity kind of stuff. And it doesn't have to. Judgment could be as much as, I'm not going to eat that food because it's going to make me sick, or I'm not going to stand by and let a bad thing happen because if I intervene, I might be able to stop a bad thing from happening. It's up to us to apply judgments in a useful and functional way. So when it comes to existentialists judging non-existentialists for their inability to be existentialists, Kenneth Smith's approach to this, again, is not ideological. He's not saying, here is the solution, everybody has to take it, and anybody who doesn't take it is an inherently awful person. That's not the kind of thing he's doing. He's describing. He's trying to say, we need to look at where we are, we need to look at our situation, and we need to look at the consequences of our actions and inactions. And from there, we'll be in a better position to make good plans for what to do in the world, how to make the world a better place. So any philosophy that eschews that sort of activity is not one he's going to advocate. Anybody who gets too nihilist or too wrapped up in their own heads and saying, well, I don't care what any of you do, I'm just going to think my own thoughts, my beautiful thoughts by myself, or like Parmenides, anybody whose philosophy leads to the destruction of knowledge and the inability to articulate reality, these are things he's going to judge, and he encourages us to judge too. Because what's the alternative?
Right. Well, I don't. I guess I would. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like you're making sort of the appeal to consequences fallacy, where it's like, well, we need to make value judgments, otherwise we can't. Otherwise, bad things will happen. We have the appeal, as far as I know, the appeal to consequences is we need to be able to call things bad, otherwise bad things will happen, right? So that's
Sure.
what it kind of sounds like to me.
But is it a fallacy?
Yeah, it is.
Well, so what you're saying is that the Germans who sat by and did not intervene in the 1930s, who allowed Nazism to rise, did the right thing, because it would have been wrong for them to say, wow, if we don't intervene, people will die.
Right. Again, that's the appeal to emotional fallacy, right?
It's not about
Mhm.
emotion.
Because if we're talking about logic here, shouldn't we have logical arguments, like something like a categorical imperative, like what Kant tried to do?
Yes, Kant was not an existentialist, and
No, I
so
know that.
this is where some of the
He was
crux
a
of the argument is coming.
transcendental idealist, right?
Right. So part of the crux of the argument is what's philosophy for? So if philosophy doesn't ever actually lead you to do anything better, what good is it? Is it so that you've got something nice and polished that you keep in your mental cupboard and say, look how pretty it is? I mean, philosophy's got to help you engage with the world constructively, and to help to we live in times that are in where many things are in great peril, and if the contribution of philosophy is not to help us to navigate that, then what's it for?
Sounds like a pragmatist argument where you consider the consequences and that you act based on your understanding of what the consequences will be.
Go on.
Yeah. So, that you consider what is good, and the pragmatist argument is that you take into account, what you consider to be good and base your judgments on your understanding of what is good, and you act on what you consider is good. So there's a judgment there.
Right. It's a component of philosophy. You have to. The Greeks were teleologists in a way that moderns really aren't. The Greeks were concerned with where do things lead? What are the outcomes of things? Many idealist moderns prefer to deny the existence of teleology. To someone who denies the teleology, the fact that an acorn keeps growing into an oak is a complete surprise every time. Who could have foreseen this? To the Greeks, it is because everything in the present is not only itself, but it's also the consequence of seeds of order from the past unfolding themselves to create us. And then we ourselves in the present are also seeds of order that are going to become something in the future and set things in motion. And if we attempt to create a philosophical system that denies all of that and pretends none of that's happening, and that we're just going to talk about things abstractly and never mention where they came from or where they're going, then it sets us up for all kinds of problems because we're out of sync with reality. There's this quote from Kafka, in the contest between yourself and the world, back the world. Because whenever our ideological systems set us up to contradict reality or to disregard it, we lose. It's the difference between the reality in our heads and our formal philosophical systems and the actual world that's outside of us, is that it always wins. So,
But I think that there's another fallacy I think here, and like I said, you can correct me if I'm wrong, which is the appeal to pity fallacy, which has a structure. There's a structure to the fallacy that I'm not going to go over, but I think that it's problematic because there's an implicit premise that's being played upon here, that a lot of duty-driven people fall into, that if one feels pity for a person, that then one ought to do something to help them. But is this necessarily true? Because I think it depends upon whether or not you have the capacity to do so, whether that's not going to interfere with other value projects, or whether you have a duty to do so or not. Right?
Well, Joe, if you allow me, I do appreciate your points of what you bring in the fallacies here. I kind of tend to agree with Rick that, like, what is the point of philosophy, right? And I think that when we focus too much on like certain types of fallacies, we're going from an analytical philosophy standpoint, and the world is not necessarily analytical or logical. So, if we're going to be talking about like, and then tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like, just like when you're using like the just like, oh, this is a fallacy, you might be going from a premise of like, we need to use logic because otherwise anything that is emotional is fundamentally wrong and pointless. Does that make sense?
I wouldn't say that, but I would say
Okay.
that Machiavellians and manipulators know how to use somebody's emotions to get what they want. So I would be very skeptical when somebody makes tries to jump that fact value gap unapologetically,
You understand the
Yeah,
flip
that
side though
makes
too,
sense.
right?
Yeah.
which is
Joe?
what which is
The,
what
the flip side is manipulators also know how to use people's systems of logic to lead them to false conclusions.
yeah, sophistry. Yeah, I
Because
understand.
logic can't lead you to the truth. It can only lead you to validity by definition.
hmm
So where do you look then for truth?
Well, I would then look for, because I used to be very intimidated by moral relativists until you actually look at the structures of their arguments and you see that they're fallacious and things like this. So again, I think in order to have a robust worldview, you do need ethics. I'm not anti-ethics, right? I would consider myself more of a moral realist. But again, I would also say you'd have to have a robust metaphysic and epistemology, and logic goes along with the epistemology. So they all kind of intertwine together. So you can't just say that one has primacy over another.
Sure, up to a point. I mean, there's one place where we can say that there's primacy, which is that, as Heraclitus said, each of us in our heads describes a reality. We model the world as we believe it is, and we act in the world according to the quote unquote reality of our head. And the problem is that if there are billions of us, then there are billions of realities all out of sync with each other. We're all acting out of sync with each other. And the challenge is that all of these attempts to construct these realities are based on the one actual world that exists independent of anybody's ideas about it, the one that was here before there were even people, and that'll be here after there aren't people anymore. So there is an ultimate authority when it comes to what's true or not, and it's not logic. Logic is a tool to help us get there. It's whether it's actual or not. The challenge for us is that we're trapped inside our mental realities, attempting to feel our way past all of our delusions and patterns of thought to figure out which of the things in our mental reality is actual and which ones are not. Logic can help us to structure and navigate the reality in our head, but the cosmos is not, logic is not binding upon the cosmos in any way. The cosmos works however it works.
It's called logicism.
You know, if Smith read the French philosopher Deleuze.
I don't know.
Well,
can
he has
ask him.
right. He has a in his book Difference in Repetition. He has quite a lengthy chapter on what real thinking, and thinking is that place that is between identities, or what you're describing as people being trapped in their heads and their identities. And he's, of course, referring to also various philosophers that came before that thrive on building up these structures of identities. And that thinking is actually occurs in the differences between the identities. And I think that kind of like reminds me of what you're saying, that we are acting on these illusions, which are identities, what we identify with as being real or true, but the real thinking occurs in between, which is similar to what Nietzsche is saying too, that about the sort of like the same idea.
Yeah. There's a challenge here, which is that we're invited under modernism to distance ourselves from our emotions and to be as logical and rational as we can be.
Right.
The premise of doing that is that feelings are dangerous and thoughts are safe as long as the thoughts are disciplined and structured correctly. But what the Greeks thought, and what Hegel thought, and what Kierkegaard thought, and what Nietzsche thought, and what Garrett Smith thinks, and what Hannah Arendt thought, is that logic is just like feelings. Logic is another place where you can be trapped for your entire life, away from truth, away from reality. Because what logic will get you is validity. And most valid statements are false. The danger of logic, its Achilles heel, is the premises. It assumes that the premises are true. and that if you follow the rules of derivation, your conclusions will also be true. But our ability to identify true premises, let alone to express them in ways that are non-distorting, is extremely flawed. And so even if we started with a host of true premises, by the time we got to our conclusions, only some of them would be true. A certain percentage of them would be false because of the inaccuracies in the premises. So to deify logic is as dangerous as to disregard it. In the
Right.
same way as to deify our feelings and our drives is as dangerous as to disregard them.
Well, that's I would agree with you, Rick, that I don't think you could have a coherent worldview with just epistemology, right? Because logic does break down. It becomes circular at a certain point. You can't justify logic through a logical argument because that would be a circular argument.
Right.
So you'd need some other category to justify that, like a value judgment, ethics, right?
And that's that third category is the one that the Greeks thought was all important, was to figure out what the core principles, not of us personally, not our own values, but the principles of the cosmos that we ought to be aligning our values to. That's the ultimate source of truth that we can use to test the validity of our logic and to test the safety and validity of our feelings against. Because as long as we're just stuck in the other two, most of the major questions of life remain unresolvable. And so as a result, if you're in the middle of a discussion with somebody who is constantly appealing to these principles, but they're not established anywhere in your feelings or in your logic, it's going to constantly look like fallacies as they keep hopping out of the line of feelings or the line of thoughts and going back to appeal to this other thing that may or may not be visible to the person in question. There's a 3-type character typology that the Greeks did and that Kenneth Smith gets into, of people who are trapped in their feelings and evaluate everything in terms of how it makes them feel, versus people who are trapped in their thoughts, who've learned to distance themselves from their feelings, but they don't have any real cosmic level principles. They only have their own preferences, which they mistake for cosmic level principles. And to those people, genuine principles aren't possible and don't exist. This is how they slip into nihilism and relativism, is they think there's no third thing possible. I think the highest thing you could possibly do is distance yourself from your feelings, and then you're done. But as you say, there is this third domain, which is ethics. And the Greeks thought that the derivation of ethics didn't come from democracy and voting about it, and it didn't come from how I felt, and it didn't come from what I thought, but it came from the nature of the world, which is tricky, right?
I don't know. Sorry, I just joined in. This is Jyoti.
Hi, Jyoti. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I don't know which one you're discussing. However, I just wanted to comment on something that you said and that we're discussing right now.
Please.
The difference between, or the duality of logic versus feeling. So brain versus feeling, I guess, is heart. However, I think there are two more elements. One is soul, and that's, I think, what you're hinting to as in the third element. But I think there's also the fourth element, which is your body. And there's tons that is philosophically held in your body, the way that you move, the way that you speak, not what you speak, but the way that you speak. And I don't know if the fable that you're talking, or the aphorism that you're talking about, refers to this. However, I would just add that there are two other elements that I have encountered.
That's an interesting point. I'll tell you a little personal story. So mental illness runs in my family. We've all got some flavor of it. I have bipolar type 2. That's not the one anybody makes movies about. They make movies about type 1, which is where you do these wild swings from mania to depression. Type 2 is more of you cycling in and out of depression. And when you're not depressed, you're happy because you're not depressed, but you're not manic. You're just like, oh my God, I don't feel depressed today. So one of the interesting problems for somebody when they're, whether it's these or some other affective disorder, one of the interesting problems is that when you're in the middle of a manic or depressive cycle, you often can't tell because your frame of reference has moved with you. That's almost the definition of the affective disorder in question. You can be depressed and think that you're seeing things perfectly clearly, or you can be manic and overexcited and think that you're judging your capabilities and what you can do in the world accurately. And as long as you're trapped within that framework emotionally, which ideas make sense to you and which ideas don't make sense to you, which of them seem to have logical coherency and which ones don't, changes. It's warped. So there's a problem with how do you get out of that mode. And one of the things that we've learned is one of the easiest ways to get yourself out of either a depressive funk or a manic spike is to do extremely hard labor for like an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours straight. Because the working the body, working the muscles, it drains your emotions. And eventually you find yourself living in this sort of meditative present state. You know, if you've been building a wall for hours or digging ditches for hours or doing karate for hours, it squeezes out all that excessive emotion and recenters you so that the things that you're feeling are now very well aligned to what you're actually physically doing. It's a way in which your body acts as a leash upon your emotions. And of course, when you're depressed or when you're in a manic spike, the great challenge is that you typically don't want to do that. If you're in a manic spike, you want to run through the flurry of ideas and write them all down and talk to people a million miles an hour. And if you're depressed, you want to sit there and mope. And it's the thing that you most need to get out of your feelings by making your body sort of dominate them, is the thing you least want to do. Like Kierkegaard said, a delusion is a state of mind in which the thing you most need to think is the thing you're least able to think. And what you just said about the body being a source of wisdom really resonated with me because of that experience. It is, in my life, undeniably true that I can use the body to overcome depression. That doesn't fit in the little model I was describing. You're right. It's like a fourth thing.
No, I just came back from my, the reason I'm late is because I just came back from a shrink group that I go to once a week.
Yay.
I have epilepsy, so seizure disorder, which is very much controlled by body.
Yeah, right.
Chemicals in the body. So, and to think about in terms of COVID, just the whole idea of isolation and touch and how essential it is for human existence is, a sensory bodily thing. It's not your mind or your feeling as in, sad, happy, but it's feeling as in touching.
Right.
And there has been
amen to that. I totally agree with you. That's one of the things I've observed moving from my country that has a culture of it's a high touch culture, and also I came from a big city where it's just so high density, you can't walk around without bumping into people, so you're constantly reminded that you have a body. And then living in Seattle, there have been times where I felt I was just this kind of floating brain, like a blob of consciousness just floating about. And, and I could walk in the middle of a weekday in a place that is supposed to be full of people, just empty and not seeing anyone and not talking to anyone.
Right.
Hours on end. And I noticed how that impacted me so negatively.
It's disturbing, right?
I don't think that human beings are designed for that.
Human beings are definitely not designed for that. We're herd animals, where and isolation is just is worse, just the same level of depression, anxiety, and all of those are also bodily controlled by our chemicals. As you said, if you went and worked out for a certain amount of time, that helps you kind of, get over, is not a good word, but
Get regrounded or recentered.
yeah, get recentered as far as depression is concerned. But one of the things that I've learned over time is when I get anxious, the simplest thing to do is, here's a bag of beans. Count how many beans there are in there. And
Yes.
I'm recentered.
Yes.
It has nothing to do with anxiety anymore. It's like, okay, and my brain is completely in tune with, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Yeah.
and that's I don't know what you would describe that as, like a soulful spiritual thing, just like meditation in many cultures.
Or just accomplishing
And-
something that you can see that is simple and easy, that you can focus on. That's actually kind of like is also like a CBT strategy, and it's something that I've done in the past without even knowing that was cognitive behavioral therapy strategy. It was just at some point feeling incredibly anxious, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do this little thing here because I know I can accomplish this and I can see the results of it, and then I can. So make me feel less incompetent and less inadequate. And then it was just like, okay, I can do this. And you kind of like build in that energy of accomplishment and just move to something a little bit more challenging, and then just go there from step to step until you get to the point where you don't really feel that anxiety as much.
It's a sense of certainty.
Yeah.
Especially like in this world, there's so much uncertainty that doing something that has predictable results is calming to your body, your mind, and your feelings.
Yeah.
And for that, I would say it's the fourth element, which is, I don't know, spirit or soul, or however you would like to describe it. I mean, religion is a huge part of human existence. So it's not something that we can disregard.
Yeah.
As
But this
philosophy.
idea of like certainty is just like talking about fallacies, right, Joe? It's just like, I think that's like one of the biggest fallacies that we do as a species, is just like to want to have a sense of certainty. And perhaps
Yes.
that's what caused us to come up with the concept of religions in the first
Yeah.
place.
So I'd say that I think the main appeal to religion, for me anyway, because I do believe in God. I don't
do
have
too.
knowledge of that. I don't have a justified true belief necessarily, but I do believe.
Yeah, I choose to believe. It's kind of like how I go about it. It's like you know.
Right.
Mhm.
I think the appeal is the idea, right or wrong, is that you could eventually transcend into some sort of a prime reality. And I think as philosophers, I think, I don't know, maybe some philosophers might disagree, but as a philosopher, when you're seeking truth, what you're actually seeking is access to the prime reality. If you want objective truth, I think the prime reality, like what Kant called the noumenal, the unknowable, wouldn't that be the greatest gift that anybody could ever give you?
True. But I guess as Jack Nicholson, the great philosopher Jack Nicholson would say in A Few Good Men, you can't handle the truth. I wonder if that's the big problem, right? Can we handle the truth?
Is one of the philosophies, fallacies, the idea that there is this mind-body dualism? Descartes' idea that notion that that to think is to be, or
Descartes started it all.
it probably goes back further than that. But the whole idea that there is a separation between the mind and the body, your subject and the rest of the world, the object and so forth, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of challenges here. There's no question. But, as somebody who has type 2 bipolar and has family, I have close family members with type 1 bipolar. You can see in both cases that there is it's at its most pathological when our feelings or our thoughts are racing very disjointed from our body. The more ungrounded we are, the less sane we are in that moment. It's certainly a hazard to get too dislocated and too out of
It's not,
experience.
like you say, it's not just a mental or experience, right? It's a that kind of condition, or any condition we have, is a whole body experience, right?
Yeah, it's a feeling and
It's
logical.
Yeah, right. It's a feeling and thinking. You can't separate the feelings from your thinking, can you?
And a bodily feel. It just the group that I came from right now, one of the women was just like do 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 do, you know. Oh, I need to explain this, and I need to explain this, and and the psychiatrist was like, do you realize what you're doing? And you're talking really fast, and that just means you're anxious. You might not know what you're anxious about, but your body is definitely exhibiting anxiousness. But your mind is under this facade of I'm, passing on a truth or a story that I have created to explain my bodily actions. So I think the elements are so connected. So there's anxiety, there's the way that your body's moving, and then there's the brain that's going, okay, I need to, this is the story, 1, 2, 3, 4 story. And then how your body is expressing it is like, I'm going to talk really fast, and I'm going to move really fast, and you breathe really fast. And the feeling is anxiety, you're feeling, wanting certainty, you're wanting grounding. And then as far as religion, the reason I brought that in was because there's a soulfulness about religion and belief in God. It's something that asks us to believe, or the idea of belief is one in which you trust something that you technically don't have any quote unquote evidence for. It
would be. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
You could just put it in. Well, you could put it in your mind and go, hey, there's no logic to it. You could put it in your heart and go, hey, there's no real feeling of God. You could put it in your body, like, I've never experienced God touching me. However, there's a fourth element that most human beings yearn and search for. And that's, I think, many times referred here as reality. But that's where, throngs and throngs of people are drawn to religion as being, okay, that's the true reality. That's what we're aiming for. Somehow that will free us from this condition that we are in.
Yeah.
I would say that what you are describing is not belief. That's faith.
That is, so belief and faith
Are different things.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using David Hume's belief?
I'm using
No,
belief
not. I'm sorry.
more
I was asking the gentleman that just spoke.
Oh,
David.
No, belief is I don't know anything about David Hume, but belief is an intellectual process. Belief is a mental construct. It's something you're doing consciously. You're willing to believe. I believe that's the I think that's the origin of the word itself.
So we believe in what we believe is true.
Belief. You belief.
Right.
I
Belief.
think, yeah, you are calling it into existence through your mental activity. Faith is an activity that comes from gnosis. It comes from an inner feeling.
So Hume considers the process of causal inference, and in so doing, he introduces the concept of belief. When people see a glass fall, they do not only think it's breaking, but expect and believe that it will break. So that has a technical definition if you're kind of going for this empiricist Humean account of belief.
That's interesting.
And then you get into, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And then you get into knowledge being a subset of belief, justified true belief, things like that.
Yeah, Hume's interesting in this stuff. He was he was not afraid to throw some logic bombs at everybody around him, was he? He called a number of interesting things into question for his era. The subject of religion is particularly interesting in a modernist sense because as successors to the medieval worldview, so much of it is centered in monotheism, whereas the classical Greeks, their worldview, which was replaced by medievalism, was actually so different that it's almost impossible for a monotheist to understand what Greek polytheism was. We try to write it as some form of monotheism, in which you owe loyalty and fealty and all these other things maybe to multiple people instead of one. But for the Greeks, the point of religion was to catalog the principles of the world that have authority over us, and you didn't have to hope or have faith that it was so. I guess we need to mute. We've got some echoing coming across. The issue for the Greeks was that you needed to be able to catalog the principles that have authority over human beings, because otherwise you didn't know what the main things were that were shoving us about in the world. So if you respected Ares, it wasn't because you loved war and wanted to give war fealty, which would be a monotheist interpretation of that polytheist version of religion. But instead, it was that war obviously, measurably, objectively runs roughshod over our plans and hopes and dreams. It has a power over us to dominate society and to dominate our plans, and that therefore it's something we have to keep track of. If we're going to try to navigate our way through the world, we have to be able to anticipate what are the things that are going to knock us off our tracks and overturn our plans. And the Greeks thought, well, war is one of those things. Whatever it is you had in mind, a war comes and all bets are off. And in that attempt to catalog that, it didn't just include things like war, but Aphrodite, beauty and attraction, because the Greeks observed that even the most rationalist, logical, hard-headed, I don't believe it until it's proven person could be completely swept off their feet if they fell in love. You didn't have to have faith that it happened. You could just look around you in the world and see people go gaga over attraction or over love. And that evidence demonstrated the reality of Aphrodite as an authority over our lives, not as a person who you feel to, but as someone who had actual authority over you and could actually dominate your activities, and therefore who you had to take into account. So when we talk about religion, it's easy for us to assume that religion has always been what it is for us today. Whereas if you look at what the classical Greeks were doing with it, it's really quite different from what we do today. It serves a very different purpose. It's an attempt to figure out what those deep principles are.
I like what you're saying about like Greek mythology. I'm a big fan, and I definitely want to get back to that. But Jody, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Oh, you're on mute.
It's Jyoti.
Jyoti?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing up like the ideas of like the body.
Remind me to bring the polytheism back, but please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm also a big fan of polytheistic stuff, at least as a construct. But I like that I'm kind of seeing these aspects of just like, using the mind to perceive reality, using the body, or using emotions, or using the spirit. It's like these are just like perhaps like different filters of perceiving what it is to be alive and what it is to be in reality. And we have a tendency to favor one over the other, and perhaps like how can we be able to integrate those things, right? Just to feel like we're doing all of the things and we're paying attention to all of it, because it feels like in the big symphony of life we have a tendency to pay attention to only one set of instruments, and it was just like, oh no, like we're now we're just paying attention to the violins, and now it's just like like now it's like other instruments and things like that. And I think that like it's important, the part of the spirit. And I think that Nietzsche so aptly talked about like God is dead, and we have people just talking about as if like he was just basically, as if it was an endorsement of atheism, and it's not. It was like a warning of like when society does not have like this, I think like a relationship with the immanent,
Right.
and like as again, and like as a mental health provider, is interesting to see like all the studies that have shown that people, whether it's like with mental health disorders or like suffering substance abuse, that those who have the best like recovery, the highest rates of recovery, are those who have a relationship, have a spiritual life, like whether it's a religion or not. But if they have a relationship, a solid relationship with the immanent, right, those are the ones who fare better in life overall. So
what you're describing is part of the. I'll get right to you in a second, Jyoti. What you're describing is part of the critique against modernism. Modernism claims it's the end of history and the culmination of all evolution and creation. Nothing could be better than the way things are now. But then we look around ourselves and see, holocausts and mass die-offs of species and so on, and it's hard to justify modernism's confidence. And part of the reason for that from an ancient Greek perspective is that they would say, yeah, modernism attempts to pretend that there's nothing more than what we want and what we think, and that there's no other basis for reality. And in fact, that's toxic to us. To attempt to reduce everything down to that shallow level of interaction with the cosmos hurts us. It ungrounds us, and it leads to high suicide rates and all kind of mental illness. So yeah, I think Kenneth and the Greeks would be right with you on that, and Nietzsche. Jyoti?
So, Gabby, what I wanted to say, do you mind if I call you Gabby?
Oh yeah, no, go for it.
Okay. I wanted to say is a lot of mental health survivors have what you called a relationship, and the relationship can be with anything, or especially a human. That's why, like, when you go out to dinner with just yourself versus going out to dinner with somebody and you just share, that's so much more rewarding than going out to dinner just by yourself. So the communication, the in-between of those four elements is what creates health. That's the best word that comes to mind. So it's all four of them coming together, and it's the between, what's between mind and the feeling. In Hindu philosophy, we call it the throat, like is between your heart and your mind, and that's what allows you to speak. And but the mouth and the palate and the lungs are part of the body, and belief is situated in different parts of your body depending on which god or goddess you're talking about. So that the polytheism is very, very much alive in modern day India.
Oh, I'm
to
a
the-
big fan of polytheism. I come from a Catholic
Mhm.
country,
And it's
which is
yeah.
the most polytheistic of all monotheistic religions is Catholicism because of all the saints. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
You know, so everyone has a perspective and something that you learn from that myth or represents something from that myth, as Rick was saying, that, you know, there is love in the world and you don't know where it comes from or how it hits you all of a sudden. And you're like, hey, wait a sec, you know, looking around, why am I acting Looney Tunes, like the loon, you know, like the moon, which is unpredictable. So in mythology, there is no quote unquote fact. There is interpretation. It's like, what do you make of an imagination and creativity in terms of, and perspective? Like, you know, you could perceive the myth as being, oh, you know, women are really being tortured and not respected. However, if you look at it from another perspective, you could also see that, oh, wait a second, they are actually, this person is actually much more powerful than the people around that are trying to woo her attention. So there's so much more perspective, and that's what I call the in-between of all these four elements. And I think that's something, I'm rambling here, but because I don't know how to end. Someone help me out.
No, it's like, no, go ahead.
I'm a huge believer of the in-between of all those four elements: your mind, your body, your spirit, and your gosh,
Your
what did
emotions.
I miss?
Yeah,
Emotions. Yeah. So I mean, we can't be ruled by either.
Yeah.
What's happening between those two, those four?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you bringing that stuff up. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to go back to the Greek mythology specifically, more Rick, is just because you were talking about like the Greeks' relationship with their gods. I would love to hear more, if you know, if any of you, if you folks know, like elaborate more on what was Socrates' beef with, you know, like of how the Greeks at his time were dealing with the concepts of the divine. I would like to know a little bit more about that.
You want to tackle that, David?
Sorry, I didn't actually hear what you were asking.
What was Socrates' beef with the way that the Greeks of his time were relating to their gods? What was he upset about? Why did he go after them?
No, I think I don't think I could approach that.
Well, don't we get into like Euthyphro's dilemma, things like that? Is either God commands X because X is right, or X is right because God commands it? And this is pre Christianity, so this would be applying to the pantheon of gods. Yeah, explore that.
Seems like there's a number of modern philosophies that deal with the issue of where we belong in the context of our of nature, and particularly the ones that build a metaphysics that based on panpsychism, that we are interconnected with nature itself. That's where we come from, and that's where we will end up. And Nietzsche's idea of the eternal return, which is not the same, not the return of the same identity, but the return of difference, of non-identity. And so there's a repetition, but it's never the same repetition. And some of the philosophers like David Chalmers has this notion that our consciousness is not, within our human bodies, but it is in nature itself. He goes into where our consciousness come from. There is consciousness in nature, and it's sort of like Spinoza's idea of God. God is a substance, and sometimes he uses the word nature to describe that substance, and that we are part of that infinite substance, which is God. So it's another way of talking about religion or the infinite or God in terms of what we understand about ourselves in a modern perspective.
Yeah, that's illuminating.
Yeah.
That's right. Certainly the Greeks thought that nature is inside of us, that we have human natures as well, that are as binding upon what we think is our individual choices, as external nature is upon the things that we can do with our bodies.
Right.
There's interesting passages in the Iliad, and I think in the Odyssey, but I'm thinking of one in the Iliad where the character whose perspective we have at the moment says, Athena said to him the following, and then there's some dialogue. And the analysis of this is that the archaic Greeks, back before the classical era, their impression of aha experiences was not that you had an idea, but was that a deity was speaking to you. And when we read about that idea, we consider the idea that Odysseus, for example, might think that Athena just put an idea in his head. We're inclined to anthropomorphize it the way that we would if it were a monotheistic deity. God said to him, blah, blah, blah. But given what the Greeks thought their gods were, what it really translates to is something more complicated than that. It's only half anthropomorphized, and half it's about this force in the world led this idea to erupt inside my head. Whether it's the power of warfare, the power of attraction, the power of the underworld, the power of the ocean, or in this case, the power of insight and wisdom. So where we'd be inclined to take credit for the idea, and we might interpret the archaic Greeks as not taking credit for it, but thinking, oh, this divine person said this to them. That the actual truth of the way that they saw their relationship to the divine was, no, this force of nature, this principle of nature, provoked them to have this idea. So it's somewhere in between, in an odd way. Paul comments in the thread, God moves in mysterious ways,
Right.
and that's one of the core ideas that differentiates the ancient world from the modern world. In the modern world, we think everything is just facts and objects, and with enough science, everything will become explained and laid bare in a giant machine, and then we'll know nobody has free will and people will just do whatever we tell them to do or drug them to do. We sort of have this mechanistic worldview that we don't have a lot of room for mystery in. But for the Greeks, it was completely inverted. Heraclitus said, nature loves to hide. Loves to hide.
Right.
The whatever the truth is, there's the surface phenomena, and that's all well and good, but that all of that erupts from the conflicts between these potent cosmic forces like Athena and Ares and all the ones who don't have names.
Right. You mentioned Laozi. Yeah. Yeah. Before you mentioned Laozi, Taoism, and that's where this idea of this natural force in nature, and that it is everywhere. It pervades, it defines who we are.
Yeah, there's some interest. Go ahead.
In Hindu philosophy, they say that a fact is just something that we believe in until it's proven it's replaced by another fact. So so-called facts aren't, when you test them, you just replace it with another, versus what you have as myth, which is the stories of all the gods, like in all the stories of Roman gods. It's interpretation that defines your relationship with reality. So, and in modern culture, we've done this hierarchy that, at the top is science, and so and so moves the atom. This atom is connected to this atom in a certain way, and DNA and blah blah. But when you go into the quantum level, you realize that, hey, wait a sec, just observation changes what's going on. So where is the fact?
Well, I would agree with you, Jyoti. Is that how you pronounce it? Oh, well, I would agree with you that there's no such thing as a brute fact, right? For example, if you're a postmodernist, you're going to have a different interpretation of a fact, like I'm holding a cup, than somebody that's like a hard solipsist versus somebody that's just peddling scientism into the public.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's such thing as a brute fact, but I'm willing to be corrected on that if anybody disagrees.
Well, Nietzsche agrees with you.
But I just hear.
Well, I'm so glad.
It is Jyoti, so you were right. But what I hear a lot is the word reality being used, and that word just escapes me, because, like, reality, who defines reality? Is your reality the same as my reality? And what do the philosophers define? If somebody could just go through a little bit and just open up that concept to me, I would really appreciate it.
Certainly, the definition of reality that Kenneth Smith plays with in the book Webs is he distinguishes reality from actuality. And he argues that, we're each caught up in the webs of programming and thinking and acculturation. We each project a version of reality that our head contains. We think that, and we respond to the world not as it actually is, but as it seems real to us in our heads, the model that we have. And so as a result, if you've got 7 billion people, you've got 7 billion realities. And that people insist on the primacy of their own reality and tell other people they have to get in line and agree with them, which is where a tremendous amount of conflict comes from. But that what people are failing to appreciate under this circumstance is that the actual world is independent of all of our realities. And the great challenge for us when it comes to epistemology is that our access to whatever is actually out there is indirect and prone to be misinterpreted by us to satisfy our desires, our ideological systems, our delusions, and so forth. He talks about, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, he talks about the way that the human mind works upon the world is like the bed of Procrustes, the villain from the myth of Theseus, who takes all the guests in, and if they're too short for his guest bed, he stretches them like on a rack, and if they're too long, he cuts parts off to make them all fit the bed, whether they do or not. And that's the metaphor for what our quote reality does to the things that we observe in the actual world. We're constantly editing it to turn it into what we expect it to be instead of what it actually is.
But is there an actual?
Do you, Rick, do you believe in properly basic beliefs like Descartes' cogito, like the I think, therefore I am? Do you think that's a legitimate, properly basic belief foundation?
Well, it seems to me that cogito ergo sum could be one step short. I mean, if one wants to play the solipsistic game, one could say, how do you even know you're the one who's thinking?
Right.
How
That
do you
was
know?
Nietzsche's critique, right?
Right. How do you know you're not just perceiving the thoughts of somebody else? So I think one of the best responses to how do you know you exist is a slap across the face, or to bite into a peach. The experience of reality is a good way to get drawn out of the trap of the mind, or doing 2 hours of karate. By the time you're sweating and trembling, all the solipsism that's been floating around your head kind of drains away, and it's easier to reground yourself in the fact that whether or not you understand the actual world, whether or not you're perceiving the actual world, your body acts as a tie to the actual world, to whatever extent you do or don't understand it.
So
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to hint at when I said the in between.
Yeah.
You're perceiving your head to be, oh, my head is this big. You close your eyes and like, oh, I have so many thoughts and blah blah blah. But then when you touch it, it's like, hey, wait a sec, how did it get so small?
Yes.
There was a
I have
response
so much
to
philosophy in there. It should the sky. But then you touch it and you're like, hey, wait a sec. So it's that in between, like, as you said, a slap in the face, which is a very bodily experience,
right.
wakes you up from your mental world, but there are many mental things that wake you up from your body world. So
I wanted to respond to Joe that Deleuze has a response to that cogito, Descartes' cogito. He says that where he says, I think I am, I think. And then I think can go on
Right.
infinitum, right? It could go on for an infinity with I think, right?
Right. And then we can get into the philosophy of language, and
Exactly right.
the cogito assumes that language has meaning, so he's not really going deep enough.
Right.
The
I
only
mean,
thing that you can prove-
it was a reasonable attempt, right? I mean, he worked hard at it. You can see that.
Right.
Absolutely.
But
And in truth, though, we don't rely on that cogito for how we experience the world, right? We
right.
experience the world through our senses, and we do based on what we believe to be true in the world, based a lot, and maybe 90% or 99% on our based on our senses and emotions, right? Maybe
Yeah,
not emotions, but
it's
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
fascinating.
but I would say as a skeptic, one could say that sense data can be fooled, for example, with optical illusions.
Oh yeah.
And even things like that's not necessarily sense data, but even things like memories can be manipulated. So I wouldn't be so confident that a slap in the face would really help that much, because you're appealing to sense data to prove sense data pretty much, and that's circular, right?
Well, it's circular from an intellectual perspective, but it's not circular from a body perspective. Like, you could sit in a corner and deny that your appetite is real and not eat anything right up until you die, and then your argument is refuted because you're gone and everybody else can carry on the discussion without you. This is the problem that teenagers eventually work their way through without understanding how they worked their way through it, is that the mind can be a powerful tool, but it can also be a trap. Kenneth Smith's third book is Minotaur, and the metaphor he's using is the labyrinth. And that many of us think that we're constructing a great tool for giving us access to the truth at exactly the time when we're doing the opposite and walling ourselves in with layer after layer of walls that spiral around each other and make themselves self-referential enough that we completely disconnect ourselves from what's actual.
Right. I think solipsism is refutable, because if everything is an illusion, then that thought is an illusion as well. So it's
Right.
self-refuting.
It's self-refuting.
However, I don't think. I think idealism can be bracketed differently than solipsism, though. Like what Kant called his transcendental idealism, his synthetic a priori is a good way to deal with the critique of pure reason, right? So I don't think that. I don't think that the well, if you don't eat, then you're going to die. So I don't think that really deals with the arguments or the problems.
Hegel did, though. You know what Hegel's refutation of Kant was?
What?
Hegel said Kant is the sort of man who wants to learn to swim before he ever enters the water. He wants to think his way to a solution. And he's
Right.
denying that the experiential part of reality is so overwhelming that some things can only be learned by experiencing them and interacting with them.
Since you mentioned Hegel, I wanted to ask that Hegel didn't think that you had to abandon an argument simply because it wasn't or it wasn't sound or wasn't valid, and then he brought in dialectics, right?
Right.
Sort of synthesis. But couldn't one say that your opponents could also use a similar dialectic to salvage their arguments?
Yeah, I mean, what you're underscoring here is the point, which is that as long as you try to stay within the circle of what you can logically prove, you can logically prove anything, which is what the sophists demonstrated to the, tragedy of classical Greece. You can in fact unravel you can disprove all of the fundamental principles that make life worth living until you hate each other and you kill each other and you're conquered by the Romans. It's possible to do that. It can be a tool for construction. It could be a tool for destruction.
Deconstruction.
We have to be very careful with it.
Mhm.
We want it to serve us. We don't want to serve it. The mind,
Right.
the logic, the reason. And it's the danger with these things. One can explore them a certain distance constructively, but it's, as you say, it's not hard at all to use some form of logic to disprove any proposition, including itself. This is why it's necessary but not sufficient. It's important. It has to be developed. These tools have to be explored and developed, but they're never going to be enough.
Fair enough.
At least that's an existential take.
Well, there's so much more to logic, so that's quite obvious.
Well, I used to try to think my way out of depression.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm a reasonably smart guy, and I applied a lot of logic and a lot of ideas and rationalizations. It didn't work. There was no way out.
I'll talk about a personal, very intimate experience of mine and how it was deconstructed for me. So, as I said, I had order. It was all under control, and then one day I just remember pulling out of my driveway, and next thing I'm in the hospital. So I'm not going to go into details on what happened between those two moments, but to get me out of the depression of that and the guilt of that, so you go into the emotions, not being good enough and feeling guilty. I had to go and quote unquote deconstruct logically what happened that day from the moment I woke up to the moment of going to bed. And that was very logical. That was like, okay. However, at the end of it, it was like the doctor asked me, I was like, I did something wrong. And he said, okay, what could you have done differently? And my logical brain is going, do, 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 do. I'm a really smart person. Come on, you can think of something. Do, 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 do. And the only thing I could think of was, well, if I'd left the garage if I'd left 5 minutes earlier, and he's like, okay, here's a mirror, and, just look at what you're saying. So much for logic. It doesn't, it's not getting you anywhere. And then I burst into tears and started crying, because that's a huge part of my human experience. And all of a sudden it quote unquote made sense.
Right.
So It went from logic da 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 da, come on, logic, logic, logic. And then logic failed me and emotion set in, and I'm like, okay. But then I'm saying, oh, emotion is the logical thing here. So there you are in between emotion and logic. And, you know, whether you want to call it circular or perpetuating each other, it's part of human experience. We can't take one out.
Yeah.
Of the
There's this Einstein quote that gets banded around a lot, which is that, you know, we can't solve problems at the same level of thinking at which we created them. There's the, you know, the circularity of the systems of thought can trap us into trying to define everything only in terms of the inevitability of what got us into the situation. It's not until we can bring other resources to bear and look at it from new perspectives that we're able to process it. And like you say, you had something happen to you that was physically traumatic, and your emotions needed to process it. You were never going to be able to settle it until your emotions got involved. And you could be as smart as you want and think all the thoughts you want, and it still doesn't get you over that threshold that your body and feelings have to go through together, which is, you know, to grieve that this terrible thing happened. It's part of processing. Yes. That Paul Newton said in the chat, for anyone who didn't see it, Sontag said, none of the rules for living are valid, but it's useful to keep developing them. It's like, you know, you need the logic, you need the epistemology, you need the ontology, you need the ethics, you need all of the, you need art, you need to develop all of these things, and you need to be able to modulate from one to the other fluidly, so that when your tool isn't working, you can shift to the right one for the job. And sometimes the tool that you need is just orientation and grounding, which is something that the body and the feelings are better at than the thoughts are. So Joe, I really appreciate that you keep bringing up the things that you're bringing up. I mean, this is all a critical part of the discussion, and I think, you know, here we are. We've spent two and a quarter hours now on a single parable. Because of course, once you get into the problem of what happens when we think, and, you know, when is it constructive or not constructive, it's a Pandora's box. It's connected to so many other things.
Right. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I think I'm going to bow out now, but thanks a lot, Rick, for hosting, and thanks everybody else for your thoughts. Have a good day. May God bless.
Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
I
Go
love
ahead.
these films. I actually ordered the books, his two books, Webs and Otherwise, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, you know, these could keep my head churning for a long time.
Little philosophical koans.
Exactly. So
Yes.
I wish we have more, just to, and maybe just identify like 5 and just talk about those 5. I don't know. It just seems like we all have a lot to process through them. And
Yeah,
it's
that's right.
So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Otherwise has 100 parables in it. Webb's has 200, and his unpublished one that I'm working on helping him publish has 328 so far. So they cover a lot of ground.
He's alive?
Kenneth Smith? Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, where does he live?
Austin.
Austin, Texas?
Yes.
You've got to be kidding me.
That's where you are, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember from last week.
Where are you?
I'm in Seattle.
Oh.
That's why I was surprised when Gabby said she was in Seattle.
Can you finagle some way for me to meet him? Oh, you can do it, Rick. Come on.
I want to talk him into joining one of these. I think that would be a blast. Because I mean,
that would be awesome.
You guys are getting all this stuff indirectly through David and me. It's far more hilarious to get it through him, because he's a very Dionysian philosopher. He laughs a lot, and he's fun Fun to talk
Does
to.
he speak or do any kind of public, I don't know, presentations or in?
Oh, he used to once in a while, but he hasn't for a while. He was busy moving out of a house in Dallas to a house. Sorry, from Houston to no, it was
To-
Dallas. From Dallas to Austin, and his house was packed with books. So it's taken him forever to relocate everything over. They got bigger place that had more space, so there'd be enough room for the books. But of course, you know what happens if you're a book collector and a book writer, and you get more space.
Mhm.
So you have
It
more
just fills
books.
up.
So he's been struggling with that for the last few years. He hasn't been doing as much public speaking, but I think it'd be a blast to get him on here.
I would love to talk to him about language and meaning, because language, is a unison of all those four elements. And then how do you, what is meaning from language and where does that come from?
Mhm.
My daughter's middle name is Laksh, which means to give meaning. But it's a word, and Lakshmi is a god.
Right.
And a goddess, and she's the goddess of the, she's called the goddess of the heart, the golden heart. So somewhere in there's meaning in, so language by alphabet and I don't know, sounds, and then where does meaning come from that? Just it's a very interesting topic for me. So
yes.
So you can introduce me to him.
Yeah. I'll email him and see if now that we've had, is it 4 of these or 5? 4 of these, right? 4 of these. I'll see if we can get him to come to the 5th one. Daniel posts, every animal thinks, but only humans think they are not animals. Oh yes, amen. Bye, Paul. See you next time. So yes, number 3 in webs, we talked about last week. And I don't think you were here last week, were you, Daniel? This is your first one of these, the Kenneth Smith series, I think, that you've come to. So
I was actually lurking in watching the playback or the stream. I wasn't logged in though.
Gotcha.
Most of it, yeah, it's very good.
Okay. So yeah, this number 3, perceptiveness. Dogs howl at unseen forces, are haunted by hungers and fears in their dreams, whimper and whine inconsolably, crave approval and affection, suffer naked angst in the frenzy of fleas. Dogs, it is said, understand the meaning of life better than we, trapped in our weavings of language and custom. Boy, does that line up with the post that you just did.
Yeah.
Right, there it is.
And actually, we're going to cover Heron Stone's language ideas on our week 3 of the non-dualism thing Saturday morning. So
excellent.
I need to get that post up in David's room.
Nice. Yeah, alas, I have a standing Saturday morning Kabuto class with the folks in Ottawa. That's my never been there, but that's my dojo. We were using Zoom to do the classes, so I can't skip it. It's my only.
Is that some kind of martial art? Kaboodle?
Kabuto.
Oh, I was
yes.
Like, Kaboodle.
Kitten Kaboodle. That would be funny. Kabuto is traditional Okinawan martial arts with weapons.
Oh.
So it's mostly about learning about centering your body and learning to move and getting your thoughts and your feelings aligned, just like karate, traditional.
I know
karate.
someone who has a Kubota tractor too, but that's
that's yet another thing. And then there's Kubota squash.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that kind of like Tai Chi, or I'll Google it up myself.
So Tai Chi was an influence on the development of karate. One of many. Kung Fu was also an influence on the development of karate, and Kabuto was sort of developed side by side with karate. The Okinawans always treated the two as, they said, the 2 wheels of the cart. They're separate disciplines, but they suggested that people study both of them because it's very different when it's just you moving than if you're trying to manipulate something while you move. So it changes the way you think and the way you feel and everything else. I didn't do it as a kid. I'm only doing it as an adult, as a sort of add-on to karate. But it's there. I've come to I avoided it for a long time, but I've come to the conclusion they're right. It really is a different way to move and think and feel, where you've got to manipulate this thing.
It reminds me of what the Waldorfian kids do in eurythmy. Eventually, they start, with their sticks, with their lead sticks,
yes,
or their steel sticks, and they're throwing it, and the another person's catching it, or they're,
yes.
So they are manipulating an object, but within a group too. So
yes. It becomes social as well.
Yeah, you got to keep the synthesis going.
Right.
Well, thank you, Rich and Danielle. I shall see you next time.
Yay, next time.
Yay, next time.
Bye, Jyoti.
Okay, bye-bye.
So I wonder if it's like Qigong that's, so subversive the Chinese are trying to, wipe that out of existence, as far as getting people to think differently, like a physical discipline.
Yeah, all these really traditional martial arts, they change the way you think about the world. And one of the things they're designed to do is to develop your spirit, where we're not talking about necessarily about the religious sense of the word, but the sense of passivity versus activity. Are you in motion? Are you able to grow the impulse to act in the world and to integrate it with the world? So I would think that any society that wanted to suppress that and wanted people to obey more than anything else would have problems with arts that develop the impulse to not necessarily obey. But which is why philosophy gets stamped out all the time, right? It's like, no, it's too subversive. We don't want you asking these questions.
I think it's unfair to do a dive into real world manifestations of philosophical perceptions, or is that I don't know. That could fill a couple books, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it could.
But I mean, I think philosophy gets a bad rap, by people to go, oh, it's just a bunch of graybeard people, masturbating intellectually, or something.
Yeah, Kenneth goes after academicized philosophy a lot. It talks about the structure of academic philosophy as designed to domesticate it and get people obsessed with the details of whether so-and-so said exactly this thing or whether this theme is illustrated in this one book. And by doing that, it drives them away from questions like, I wonder if the balance of power in the modern world is wrong and we should change it. It's like these basic fundamental questions that might alter the world sort of get shoved aside in favor of this sort of.
There's a cartoon I like. It shows a bunch of dead libertarians, and one sign says heaven, the other sign says lectures about heaven, and they're all going off to the lectures.
Ah, yes, that's a classic quote about Germans and academics.
Oh, okay. Well, someone.
Yes. Yeah, Kenneth Smith quotes that one.
A couple years ago, Smith was doing calls that that David and I were in on, and I think I kind of pissed him off because I mentioned about my permit trail idea, and I said, well, how could your philosophy help me improve that or relate to it? And I think he just wrote me off at that point.
Okay, that's funny.
Because that was the last time I was on a call with him.
Yes.
I don't think it's a coincidence.
Yes. I'm gonna step away for a moment. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I.
Well, that's just really fun. I enjoyed this. I'm gonna have to.
Did it come to a logical end point?
Well, I thought we'd get through more of the aphorisms, but I mean, they're so rich. They just created so much, side radiation.
I think Anne wanted to do some of the
yeah,
aphorisms. Anne, now's your chance.
Okay, well, I mean, I was just saying to David, I tried to post a short one and then I posted a longer one. The one, I don't know, Daniel, if you had one you liked. I mean, there was the short one was about construction standards. Two cars collided at a yellow light at right angles. Okay, I picture that. For a block and a half in every direction, houses collapsed. It was disastrous. The developers had been banking on a tornado hitting first. That's almost like a certain kind of absurdity to me. I mean, what do you make of that?
I think I'm going to use that in my city council campaign. Yeah, I think Rick nailed it when he said about, modernity just wants to see who can win the corner cutting contest, but I'm sure it has a deeper nuance too. But yeah, I mean, it's and there's an absurdity angle, which is really sublime.
Which
yeah.
Thing? The construction standards.
Oh yes, I love that one.
I would say that's got implications for a city council race too.
Yeah, Kenneth's got a sense of humor. He talks repeatedly about how philosophy needs a sense of humor. It's like, how are you going to process the discrepancies between what we imagine things ought to be like and how they actually are if you can't laugh?
Well, John Cleese is doing a virtual tour. It's called the Giving Up Hope Tour.
No.
He said, I used to think the world was mostly sane with little pockets of insanity, and now I think it's the other way around.
Oh God, the Giving Up Hope Tour.
David, which municipality are you running in? Where do you live?
It's Thousand Oaks. I'm under the same roof with David, and I'm Dan. I'm going as Dan Tweed. So people call me David.
Dan. I'm sorry. Why did I say David? So Thousand.
David all the time. I have a brother David.
Yeah. Where is Daniel? Daniel, where is Thousand Oaks? I know of one outside of Houston, but that's not where you're at, is it?
No, it's Ventura County, about 100 miles north of LA. Kind of on the border of LA County. So,
yeah. So what are your issues going to be?
It's going to be like open source as possible government, total transparency at all levels of governance, and also make this the headquarters for a global, biosphere stewardship project that also, echoes Elon Musk's ideas to make us multiplanetary, and, Bucky Fuller's ideas to, make us not to give us an omni-advantaging civilization, and also some Christian transhumanism in there, and, lots of fun stuff. I ran 2 years ago too, and made like 6 debates, and just had a lot of fun. I didn't spend any money. That was one of my slogans was, I'm keeping the money out of politics by not spending any.
Now, do you think that's put you at I know it put you at a disadvantage. Do you think that's a stance that in order to hopefully ever get elected, you might have to breach a little bit?
Yeah,
spend some money?
I might actually do some serious fundraising this time, or some semi-serious fundraising. I mean, I got like 3,500 votes. It was 13th in a field of 13, but it's a smaller field this year. It's like there's 8 people running for 2 open seats. And it is possible for people with the right ideas to win over the big spenders, So
no, I think that's that I would think that's very possible, particularly there in California, where there's an openness to new entrants in the field, etc. So when is the election? November 3rd,
yeah.
Okay, so it's part of the overall.
It's in the general
big election. Yeah, so you're on a ballot with it's like 3 pages long.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to get 20 valid signatures from residents to get nominated, and yeah, I got 28 just to be safe, and just got the word back that they all cleared muster, and Dan Tweed will be on the as a I didn't spend $1,600 for my little candidate statement. They charge you a lot just to put that 500-word essay about why you're so great. But
Really?
it's going to have home care aid, which is my occupation. I'm a registered California home care aide, taking care of David's dad. And so, yeah, kind of a spaceship Earth care aid, too.
So did we come to a conclusion? Or do we want us to do webs again next week or not?
I know you're eager to move on to the longer essays, but I gotta say these people are hopping.
Yeah, I'm flexible. I really am.
What do
By
you
the
think?
way, do those
More
books have
essays.
ISBN numbers? I didn't get it answered. Where they?
They
No,
do?
there's no ISBN number.
Oh,
Oh, I
okay.
thought there was. Hang on, let
That's
me
too
open up
bad.
my copy.
Thanks,
Okay.
David, for letting me get in again. I was having some technical issues.
Sure, welcome back.
Basically, like a user problem.
These things happen.
Yeah.
They do have
Good it's gonna
ISBN
do.
numbers.
If you want
Oh, they do.
if you want a
Yes.
physical copy of the book, you're just gonna have to email him directly.
Oh, it's weird. This
Which
is
you
not
can do.
copying and pasting.
I think a personal check to him would.
I would love to continue having these meetings. This meeting was absolutely exhilarating. I really appreciate, guys. It's been it's really nice to be able to have these conversations, which I consider them meaningful, just like truly meaningful conversations. And it's not very easy to find them nowadays because people are just scared of talking because they might trample on other people's feelings, yada, yada, you know how it goes. So yeah, I would love to be part of the coming meetings.
but
And please let me know if I'm talking too much because I have a tendency to do that.
Yeah, but I think the only way to purchase the book is directly through him. You'd have to email him directly to purchase, and I think he would take a personal check for the
Okay.
price.
Yeah.
But anybody can do that. But
Mhm.
so I'm okay
Thank you.
with doing more again. Go for round 3. I'm entirely flexible. Yeah.
I know Anne
librarians
expressed an
would be able
interest
to
in.
order them.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, it looks like librarians would be able to potentially order them since they have the standard book number.
Maybe.
Well, I mean, you're not going to get them through Amazon.
No.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, they're not. I mean, he self-published these, so
Yeah, he has this. These are among the books that are taking up space in his house.
How big was the press run?
It wasn't that big.
5,000 or something, or
Something on that order, yeah.
Oh.
But anyway, I was going to say that Anne in the chat was suggesting that we move on and talk about more parables, and I thought that was a good idea. I wasn't.
It's always hard. I never, on the one hand, it's okay that the conversation takes its own flights of fancy, and as long as it's good conversation, I'm fine with it.
Yeah,
But, you're always going to get some people who want to have other things, and you can never balance exactly everybody's wants and desires. But you try. But
Yeah.
as long as the conversation is mutating and taking its own turns and it's good stuff, then that's great. I mean, it's just one type of conversation as opposed to another. I always make the differentiation between a study group and a discussion group. A study group is we're going to cover a text point by point, and there's a definite purpose, as opposed to a discussion group, which is more free form. And I think a lot of people mostly prefer discussion groups. I'm okay with either. I don't have a preference. So.
David, what's the actual name of your Thursday night meetup?
It's on Thursday nights. It's not every Thursday night, but biweekly. If it's not, you're looking at the calendar on Meetup, the next one Thursday is at 7:00. It's Fugitive Images, but we're doing the Millennium and Microcosm book.
Okay, let me
Chapter
see
by
if
chapter.
I've got the thing is you hop all over the place, like Portland and Maui, etc. So it's a matter of where I have my calendar set to somewhere in Meetup. Of course, Meetup is not the easiest. I never can find anything using the search feature. I don't know why that is, but let me see if I go to Thursday and see if yours is coming up.
So you're going to do Millennium Microcosm. That's exciting.
Yep.
Because I feel about that the way you feel about Dramas of the Mind. It was the big eye opener for me around Kenneth's work.
I know you said nights are bad for you, but if you could make it, you're welcome. But yeah, nights are bad for you. I know.
What time is that?
Well, yeah, 7.
Ah, yes, I do have it now. You're in Seattle. It's coming up in these. Let's see. Okay, let me do this. I've got it showing up in the Portland Free Philosophy Lectures, the Seattle Analytic Philosophy Club, and the Maui Philosophers. Which one shall I? Oh, and also the Philosophy Society and Culture Meetup. So I've got 4 different places.
Rick, you and I should talk about the arrangement, because are you still planning on doing the full ebook publication?
Oh yeah,
Millennium Microcosm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I still want to have a conversation with you. I think there's, for one thing, to start off with, there's been some rearranging of the sections. I noticed in your edit.
Ah. Okay, we could look at that.
Your Toad PDF chapters that you sent me a couple of years ago. There are some rearrangings. It'd just be interesting to have a conversation about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Because if that was unintentional, if that wasn't Kenneth's intention, we could fix it, turn it back around.
I don't know if it was or not, but yeah, there have been some section rearranging. Anyway.
Yeah. Let's find a time to talk about that. So Thursday nights at 7.
Yeah, actually, we already did 1 and 2. We're going on to 3 and 4, which is fugitive images. And yeah, if you could make it, that'd be great.
I'll find out. I'll talk to my wife about it.
Will there be a Google Drive link to the text?
I record all of these.
No, I mean, can the text be read in advance?
It's in the description on the. It's in the description on the meetup event.
Where do you post the recordings, David?
They go to my Facebook page. They go to my Twitter. They go to my YouTube.
What? I didn't know you had a YouTube. What is your YouTube channel?
It's actually you put it on the meetup conversation, the link for the YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. David Wolf. Let's see. Fugitive images. Let's see. Messages. Oh no, it wouldn't be messages. It'd be community. So I have to go to the main Portland Free.
Okay, I think that's my YouTube channel.
Oh, cool. Did you put it in the chat?
Yeah.
Excellent. Select, let's see. Nope. Select all.
The first time I did the From Hell chapter reading, I got a lot of pushback on people not wanting to be recorded. A lot of people got a bit testy about that.
I do feel a little bit of trepidation about it, but part of me is just like, what, that's the future. Might as well.
Well, you haven't put your video on, so I guess
that's true. Yeah, but that's my full name there. So, and my full name is actually quite unique, even for Brazilian standards. But it's fine. I think it's the future, and honestly, the impression I got is the conversation is pretty civilized, and I think that's good that people get exposed to civilized conversations on philosophy and things like that. So you're not gonna get pushback from me. But yeah, I admit it, I felt a little bit of trepidation in the beginning.
I think Kenneth watched at least part of the first one because he responded in the email.
I don't know if he watched it, but he certainly read the transcript I sent him.
You transcribed it.
Oh, YouTube does that automatically.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I wonder how
There's
it's going to
another
be with my
conversation I
accent.
want to have with you, Rick, because I mean, all the problems that he's been having over the years, every year the technology gets better. Text to speech gets better. Transcription, gets better. OCR gets better. He always types in articles, which you don't have to anymore. There's so many voice to text programs that will do it automatically with punctuation.
So if we could get his some of his classes up
Right.
on YouTube, even if it was a private channel that he charged people to read, he would get them transcribed automatically by
Right.
YouTube. Well, that's powerful.
Is there any way, yeah, we could have that conversation? I think you have more success than I ever would of getting these ideas over to him.
Yeah, okay. I'll talk to him about it.
But, yeah.
I'll talk to him about it.
Yeah.
Is he willing to do any author-read books on tape kind of stuff?
Whoa.
There are no books.
Well,
I mean, there's Webs and Otherwise, and the one he wrote in 1974, but those are the only books.
Well, I mean, people value when the author reads the original work with their...
Millennia and Microcosm was never printed in 2 covers. That was only published in Comics Journal. And also the other one,
Crypto Revolution. Crypto Revolution of Our Age.
Crypto Revolution, that's the other one. That was also as a full book. But
Yeah.
again, when you say the word book to him, he only understands that definition of one thing, a paper within 2 covers. But it doesn't have to be, I mean,
Right.
I would just meant, is he
books are
open to
just-
narrating his writing?
But I don't think he fully understands that, what an ebook is and why it's so much more of a exactly ideal for what he's looking at, because you can't invest the amount of money to print these for a very limited print run.
Well,
But
as
ebooks eliminate that problem.
and as
I don't
Dan is
think he gets
saying,
that.
they could be paired up with audiobooks if he would read them. So he could be selling the ebooks and the audiobooks both.
Call them products.
Like they'd be author narrated audiobooks. Yeah, that would be popular, right? I mean, how many philosophers do you get to hear them read their own books in their own words?
Yeah. Well, okay. I mean, okay, but I have a minority opinion. I don't much like that. So that's a minority opinion.
But at any rate, ebooks, certainly. That's what I have in mind for these things that I'm putting together. I thought we would start with Otherwise and Webs just because we've got them already, all just about ready to go, and Minotaur could follow right on its heels.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to do it.
Yeah, the reason he doesn't do it is because he can't drop the money to print these in paper. But he doesn't have to be the first go-to,
right?
Which is what it is for him.
Well, if maybe you, David, volunteer to be the translation for his Luddite ways into.
David's asking me
technology.
David's asking me to have the argument because he's already had it with Kenneth.
I've already tried. Yeah, the thing is, his son is a computer guy. I mean, isn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he is.
I don't know. But
we'll figure it out.
It's a bit frustrating. This has been going on for years. So
yeah. Well, we have a saying in Brazil. I love to translate sayings in Portuguese into English because they tend to be so confusing in English, and people look at me just like, what? But one of the things that we say when it comes to that is just home saints don't make miracles, meaning that in case of his son not being able to get him to get into the new technological world, might be because of that. You know,
Yeah.
so-
I'll talk to him. I could be persuasive with Kenneth. We'll see if we can change this. I'd really like to get him on one of these calls so that people could talk to him. I think that would be a riot. I mean, I've taken classes from him where it was just him and me, and I've
Yes.
listened to tapes of him and one other person. But what I've never experienced is what he used to do at the university, which is where you could have a bunch of students and he could field questions and do this impromptu discussion.
That's the other thing. If those seminars that you guys did together are still available, I certainly would love to partake on them. I know he was asking money for them. I'd be happy to pay, but I don't know if they are available anymore. They were on the Greeks, right?
Yeah, I was doing two, one on the Greeks and one on Hegel. And the problem is that they were on a MyBook Western Digital drive, and there was a version of Mac OS that when you upgraded to it, it erased the drive. And both Western Digital and Apple both pointed at each other, said it's not our fault, it's their fault. And in theory, that data is recoverable, but in practice, we're not sure how to get it. So I only have a handful of those audio recordings left because that happened.
Yeah, that's a shame.
It is. I
I
have
hope-
piles and piles and piles of notes, though.
Yeah, that's usually like $1,000 to get a drive.
If
erased,
so, I think that would be worth it.
Yeah, I've kept the drive safe. I intend to at some
Yeah.
point.
if it hasn't been like low level formatted, you can
No.
get like 99% back.
Yeah, that's my hope.
Well,
But in the
You guys
meantime,
have-
he has recordings from, I think, dozens of classes, if I remember right, and each one is like somewhere between 10 and 40 cassette tapes.
Hmm.
So
do you have
Very
those?
prolific guy, art and visual and written. Man, he's like
Do
the
you
full.
have those?
no, I've only got a few of them. But what I did is when I bought him that computer upgrade a few years ago, I also bought him the equipment to transcribe those onto DVD. So that they don't have to be on tape anymore. And so he's got all the materials he needs in order to mass produce those. And he was going to pay me back by letting me purchase those recordings from him, which I'm perfectly happy with. So I will have a bunch of those. Right now I have like 10 niches, but I think you already have these, right? The Nietzsche class.
So
Can't remember,
anyway,
David.
folks, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited. I've never heard of Kenneth Smith before. This is my first exposure to him, and he sounds like a really fascinating guy.
Where are you
Yay.
located, Gabriella?
What?
Oh, where
She's
are you
in
located?
Seattle.
Oh, you're
I live in Seattle.
So do
Mhm.
I was just gonna say, do you guys have a little free library movement up there very much, where people put like little,
Yeah,
sidewalk
absolutely.
steps?
That is super cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna do this something, and this is like a waterproof thumb drive, 32 gig. I got like a bunch of them. I'm gonna put them in the little free libraries and advocate that, and then make a Geo Apps program where people can, trade off thumb drive material.
Huh.
between
That's
them.
awesome.
So,
That's
good
really,
idea.
really cool.
Part of my campaign strategy.
Yeah. With that said, before I go, if you guys look into if you check on the videos on YouTube with like interesting people and stuff like that, I have one recommendation. This guy, he's a psychology professor. Actually, he just retired, so he's gonna be doing more videos on YouTube. His name is Eric Dodson, and even though he's a psychology professor, he's very much into philosophy. Very much into existentialist and humanist philosophy, which is pretty much my jam. So yeah, I should recommend for you guys to check it out. He's a
you.
really fascinating guy too.
Yeah, we're doing a Saturday morning non-dualism philosophy kind of study group. We're already into week 3 coming up. It'll be on David's
It's
page. We're
very.
going to do Heron Stone's tactical language for the 90 minutes.
It's very easy to get your own event on the calendar. if you feel strongly enough about a subject, you can either do a presentation or at least put it on the calendar as a discussion group for this
Me?
guy or any topic.
Oh God, no, 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 no. I'm not ready for that stuff yet. This is just, it requires a level of organization that I do not master yet. I've been working on that, but I thank you for that. And like maybe in the future I will take you up on it. But right now I'm having a hard time enough trying to start my new business and organize my own thoughts. So, but that sounds exciting.
Can you put in the chat the psychology guy?
Sure, I can. Yeah, I'll put his link. Absolutely. But yeah, I should get going. Thanks again, guys. I really appreciate the invitation. That was awesome. And please do feel free to let me know when I'm talking too much, because I have a tendency to do that. I'm a votary of Hermes, if we're going to refer to Greek mythology. So
Communication.
yeah, absolutely. You guys have a good one.
See you
Take
next
care.
Monday, maybe.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, guys, I'm probably going to shove off too. And, at a minimum, David, I'll see you at From Hell Friday night.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Ciao.
Bye, Anne. So, David, you said we should talk about Millennium Microcosm.
If that's a private conversation.
I don't think I don't think I have the PDFs. Maybe I do on this hard drive. No, I don't. Wait, maybe. You emailed them to me, right? Or you Facebooked them to me? Which one of the two?
I can't remember which way I sent them, but are you just talking about the numbering of the chapters? Was off?
You don't have the PDF ready to email, do you?
Let me take a look and see what I've got here. Chapters. Oh no, this isn't it.
I think you Facebooked.
Well, I'm a little confused because I'm not finding the PDFs right here in the directories about the book. This is generally where I put them.
Okay.
So maybe not.
00. There we go.
Look at 00.
Okay. Yeah, you Facebooked them to me.
Oh, 00. I see it. This was from April of last year.
Okay, opening. Now let us go to you.
Yes.
Scan. Well, I don't know. Let's see.
You're having this whole internal dialogue.
Okay.
There we go. Y2K and the conflict of cultures.
Well, as you can see, I mean, you just have to go through it meticulously. Now, this is as it was published in TCJ. You start things off with the preface. Almost all who pass through our abattoirs of higher education. And that goes on all the way to the bottom of the page. To grasp what the millennium implies, we must first recapitulate our own evolution and momentum.
Okay, so I can tell you what happened. I know what happened. He wrote an additional thing to go at the front.
Okay.
And so that threw the numbering off. Right, because in my list, this is number 1, and I made it number 1 because it was the first one he published, but I've also got a number 0 that comes before it, which is what he wrote.
All right.
His number 0 is the personal note on cosmic issues.
Right. Now, okay, I can follow that. In fact, let's do it this way. I don't know if this makes a difference, but if I go to you here, a personal note on cosmic issues. You start
Hello.
with the Black Hawk quote,
Yes.
and then the Demetrius of Phalerum
Yes.
quote,
Yes.
and it says the material goods of a civilization are perishable in obvious ways.
That's right.
And that goes through the Gilbert Murray quote, the Max Planck quote, goes through the W.H. Auden quote.
Yes.
Keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, all the way to the end, and it ends with into the web of a self-serving matrix that nearly perfectly masks from view its own pathological logic.
Yes.
Okay, so now, okay, I can follow that. Go back to you.
We're going to get him published.
All
We're going to get
right,
all of these things
all right.
published. Damn
So
it.
here we go to, I'm going to you, I'm going to this, I'm going back to this. Okay, so now.
Fugitive Images Part 2.
This is as it was published in TCJ.
Pulling it up.
Well, I'll go back. One, Fugitive Images Part 1 was published in this issue of TCJ. What is then the meaning of the modern epic and its forms goes down to the last line of that. The concentrated intelligence of a mechanistic civilization runs down thus, inexorably like a clock, imperceptibly to its own mechanical minds. Next issue begins Fugitive Images Part 2, Introduction to the Issues. And here we go. This is where your section 00 is. The Black Hawk quote, the Demetrius of Phalerum quote, the Gilbert Murray quote, the Max Planck quote, the W.H. Auden quote, all the way down to exactly where it ends. So that nearly perfectly masks from view its own pathological logic. Okay, so what you did is you, or either he did, was you extracted, or one of you extracted this segment of the End Times column and lopped it onto the beginning. Now, I'm not saying that's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different. Maybe it is a better way of doing things. I don't know. The reason I would argue for keeping it where it is was because if you read this Fugitive Images Part 1, Epics and Regimes, which starts with what then is the meaning of this modern epic, read all the way to the line where he says, my argument and explication can be meant only for those who have struggled in some measure to attain a mind of their own. All others read on at peril of their own self-distress and bewilderment.
Right.
Wonderfully pithy. And at that point, at that break, now he starts in with the Paul Valéry quote.
I love it.
The Crisis of Mind. And he talks about that for a little bit. And he goes on with Aristotle's quote.
Yes.
It just seems to me to be such a very smooth transition from that introduction, from the Epics and Regimes introduction, to the point where the Paul Valéry quote begins. And from there, you go on to the Black Hawk quote and all the rest of the quotes.
Yeah, you're right.
Like it's all very much one piece.
It's a good flow.
Chapter as a whole is one hot, solid thing.
You want to combine it into one called Fugitive Images.
Yeah, I think that's just. I think it was divided just by the necessities of the Comics Journal's printing. It was just too long to print in one issue. They had to cut it, but the coherency of this chapter is.
You're right.
I think very clear.
You're right. It flows very well this way. All right, I'll put them back together. I'll make a chapter out of it. Well done, sir.
And that's the way I have it in my HTML page.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, the spelling of the Klein bottle. It's Klein, K-L-E-I-N, a Klein bottle.
Where's that occur?
He spells it K, or perhaps anyway. It was printed as Klein, K-L-I-N-E, but I checked it. It is definitely K-L-E-I-N, a Klein bottle. So that's, yeah, all these years, and it took me a long time before I double checked on that.
There it is, Klein bottle.
Yeah, it's after the Black Hawk
I see it.
quote. You see it, okay. No, it's after the Planck quote, but before the Auden quote.
That is misspelled.
Yeah, it's definitely Klein, K-L-E-I-N. A Klein
Yeah.
bottle.
Maybe they were thinking of the comedian Robert Klein, right?
You know, I catch misspellings. One of the ones that I caught in his quote, "The unheeded thing escapes," from Oedipus, which he attributes to Tiresias, but it's not. It's Cleon, and he's got it in his head that way. He quotes it that way 2 or 3 times, but I've been fixing it wherever I found it. So he gets little things like this that he gets stuck on. I'll fix this one. Thank you.
I think going back through our messenger history, I think I noted some of these, or all of them.
Okay.
You
have to dig back through our messenger history.
I think if you check, here we go. Okay, if I'm still sharing here.
Yeah.
Okay, the way I have it is very, very close to in my HTML web pages, is very close to the TCJ publication.
Yeah.
I start here with the preface, and I put the divider, the decorative divider, to make it very clear where the preface is, as opposed to the beginning of the chapter, and I do the bolding of the first 4 words.
You should know that he hates the title End Times. He says Comics Journal foisted that upon him.
The reason I do that, Rick,
yes,
is because Millennia in Microcosm lasts from beginning with chapter 1, Y2K and the Conflict of Cultures, all the way down to Modern Civilizations 1 and 2. That's the book Millennia in Microcosm. After that is Slavish New World, and after that is Omnipossibility 1, 2, and 3. Now, okay, so are those chapters, Slavish New World and Omnipossibility 1, 2, and 3, really, truly, officially intended as part of Millennia in Microcosm? Or, as I say, are they in fact standalone pieces, standalone columns that were just published as End Times columns? They're not really part of the Millennia in Microcosm book.
You think they're their own thing?
I think they're standalone columns.
I'll reread them. I'll see.
I think they're standalone columns. I don't
might
think
be
they're
right.
part of the Millennia in Microcosm book.
You might be right.
So I put them as, Millennium in Microcosm was serialized in the End Times columns.
Yes.
But in addition, there was Slavish New World and Omnipossibility as standalone columns.
I'm just pointing it out because he's going to bring it up every single time he sees it. And part of the reason I know that is because Beverly, my wife, has a publishing minor, and she and I've talked about these numerous times, and she's pointed out that the Comics Journal did a good job of coming up with punchy titles to replace some of his sort of elliptical ones. Because like Millennia and Microcosm is accurate, but End Times is punchy. And if you turned it around and made End Times the title and Millennia and Microcosm a subtitle, you'd have a more potent book title than if you just advertised it as Millennia Microcosm. And the same is true for Time Out of Joint, the Crypto Revolution of Our Age.
Yeah.
Crypto Revolution of Our Age is accurate, but Time Out of Joint is punchy. So they work great as a title and subtitle. But again, he's sort of like, no, I want the title that people won't buy.
Okay, so moving on to fugitive images. Here's the way I've done it. And I follow the TCJ printing. I just subdivide it differently.
Yeah.
So here's epics and regimes. And again, I do exactly the same thing all the way down to where he states, my argument and explication are meant as meant for those who have struggled in some measure to attain a mind of their own. All of those read on at peril of their own self-distress and bewilderment. I put
Yes.
the decorative divider right there to make
Yes.
it very clear that this is the preamble for the epics and regimes. And at that point, we start with part 2, introduction to the issues. That's not the way TCJ subdivided it, but I think it's so perfectly because these quotes, the Valerie quote, the
Yeah.
Blackhawk, the Demetrius, the Gilbert Murray, the Max Planck.
Yeah.
This is a series
It is.
where Smith is laying out the foundation stones that he's going to build on. He's
That's
laying out the plinth. He's
Yeah.
laying it out step by step, quote by quote. And very clearly, this is where introduction to the issues is. It should not start with the Blackhawk quote. You should start with the Paul Valery quote.
Hang on. Let me go look at my copy.
Yeah.
I want to sync up with you here.
All of that is introduction to the issues.
Blackhawk.
Now that does
Paul
make
Valery.
that
I
does
see.
make it quite lengthy,
But so what? It's
but
Kenneth.
it's so very clearly obvious
Yes.
that it's a coherent piece
I agree.
altogether.
I agree. All right. I'll put them together and I'll put that split right there, like you suggest.
So it's not chapter 3 and chapter 4 of the book Millennium in a Microcosm. The entirety of Fugitive Images is itself chapter 3, subdivided into 1, Epics and Regimes, and 2, Introduction to the Issues. And so you've combined what TCJ published as chapters 3 and 4
Yes.
into what I will now call chapter 3, Fugitive Images. And from there, we move on to what used to be chapter 5, and now everything bumps up 1, is now chapter 4, the beginning of ancient, well, there is only 1 chapter of ancient civilization. Chapter 4 is now ancient civilization. And now this is another conversation altogether. I think this goes from A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, all the way down to H. Now, remember, if you recall, that's not the way it was published in the Comics Journal.
Right.
But very clearly, in fact, if I did bring up that particular scan page, we'll go through that here. Ancient Civilization. Now it was nature as becoming in as intrinsic truth. See how confusing this is.
Yes.
It was printed as Ancient Civilization Part 1, Nature as Becoming in as Intrinsic Truth, as if that's the title of the whole thing.
Right.
But I say that is segment A.
You're right.
Nature as Becoming an Intrinsic Truth, and
You're
goes on to segment B, Custom and Nature, Aristocracy and Philosophy, goes on to C, Form and Matter, D, Arete, Natural Excellence, E, Daemon and Eudaimonia, and that is where that chapter ended in that printing of the Comics Journal issue. And next issue, we went on to what was called Ancient Civilization Part 2, Mythos and Logos, and that goes on until G,
F,
Character and
G.
Class. Okay, well, wait a minute, hold on, whoa. We stopped at E, Daemon and Eudaimonia.
Where's F?
Where would F be? F
Everything
was
before G.
Mythos and Logos,
Yes.
which gets masqueraded
Yes.
as the entire title for this part chapter. You see how incoherent this is.
I broke this down the same way you did. I came to
Yeah.
the same conclusion.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a series of chapters.
Yeah, these are very, very short segments inside the entire chapter that's titled Ancient Civilization, but it's clearly A, B, C, D, E, F, G, ending with H, Sophism and Corruption. So it's not 2 chapters, Ancient Civilization Part 1, Ancient Civilization Part 2. One is titled 1 and one is titled Mythos and Logos. Yeah, this is much more coherent the way I've got it here.
Yeah, that's right.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
Right.
Yeah. And it's one long, very long chapter, Ancient Civilization, chapter 4.
Yeah.
And next chapter begins with medieval civilization.
It could be. It can either be one giant chapter, or it can be 6, 7, 8 short chapters.
Yeah,
but what
the
it can't
lettered
be, it can't be
segments.
divided the way Comics Journal did it, because that
Yeah,
doesn't
the
make
lettered
sense.
segments are very short.
Yeah, they could be ultra short chapters.
I think it's it's better just have this as a one long chapter and subdivide it A
Yeah.
to H.
Yeah. Okay,
That's the way I put it here.
let's do that.
I redid that graphic.
I see that. This is a major weak spot in the work I've been doing to get it published so far, is I haven't done anything on the graphic side.
I idly kind of considered laying out the money to get an illustrator, just idly. Well, I just found better than what the Comics Journal managed.
Oh yeah, they were in a hurry.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay.
And it,
Covers
like,
a lot of sins.
what could somebody do in a few minutes, right? It's like, there you go. Okay, so you're going through this.
What I did so far, we're now on Thursday. This upcoming Thursday, we're going to do 3 and 4. And here is I did this one graphic for the Paul Valery quote.
Yes,
It's
a great quote.
It definitely is.
God, it's potent. I got that book and ended up reading the whole thing.
I intend to, but yeah.
He's not always. Sometimes you really have to put yourself into his place and time to understand him, because he was addressing very pressing issues of the day that don't often get taught today. But at other times, the pressing issues of the day are still exactly potent, and if anything, gotten worse, which makes him, prophetic.
All
right, we'll work on prepping this.
I think one of the books Ken always has recommended, and in fact recommended back all the way back when it was first printed, back in that Comics Journal, Dramas of the Mind.
Yes.
Russell Jacoby, The Last Intellectuals.
Oh, I haven't read that.
Which I started.
Yeah.
But yeah, which talks about that culture of intellectuals back in the early 20th century that's pretty much extinct today.
Yeah.
You've heard me let me just stop sharing. You've heard me say this, right? I read an interview with Hugh Hefner, and he said, when we first started Playboy, we interviewed Bertrand Russell.
Yeah.
Today we interviewed Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah.
It's just a different culture today.
Well, that sums it up.
More of an anti-culture. In Kenneth's words, the transformation from culture to anti-culture has progressed profoundly during that time.
Negative progress.
It's like today, when people say, I only read Playboy for the articles, they're joking or lying. But as my friend Jerry likes to say, in the 60s, there were some amazing articles. It's like Gore Vidal. It's like all these intellectuals were writing for it. And as you say, today it's Jimmy Kimmel.
Yeah, there are no public intellectuals anymore. That's a lot of what Russell Jacoby is saying in The Last Intellectuals. That culture is extinct. We talked about this a little bit in a few of the, are there any examples of a public intellectual? Yeah, you might get Noam Chomsky, but does he ever get interviewed on television? No.
Not anymore.
So, yeah, that category of celebrity just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I'll give some points to Mark Maron.
Well, let me work on this thing. I'll work on assembling the pieces, and we'll see how far along we can get it. A lot of it's ready to go. So I don't know if I mentioned, I have a friend who ran a ebook publishing company for a while, 10 years or so. And he has a lot of software for converting PDFs and other kinds of formats into the standard ebook formats. I mean, the whole range of them. It's like you run this software and bang, it comes out in all of them. So I have access to that. We could get Kenneth Smith on, you know, you name it, Kindle, Rocket, whatever. Fire. I think we should do that.
I'd plug him wherever I could. I don't know what wouldn't swing much weight, but
One of the things I've slowed down on is that I like to go through and find all of his quotes and double check them. Sometimes they're not quite right. And even when they're right, he often doesn't remember where he got them from. It's like, well, Nietzsche said that, but where did Nietzsche say that? Well, it's one of these 8 books. It's like, so I like to chase them down and put an appendix at the end, which is, these are all the references and here's a bibliography. Like, last week, I forget who was hitting us. No, it was on my Facebook page. I was doing a philosophical post and somebody was hitting me up for a bibliography. And I don't think it's that hard for us to do it. And it would provide a real value added service to his books.
Here, I got this for you guys here. This is Mr. Gary Groth himself. Russell Jacoby makes a persuasive argument in The Last Intellectuals that there was no more vigorous and stimulating period in 20th century intellectual life than that between the 30s and the 50s. In the 30s, Partisan Review published Philip Roth, Sidney Hook, James C. Farrell, Mary McCarthy, Dwight MacDonald, Irving Howe, Edmund Wilson, Lionel Trilling, Delmore Schwartz, Max Eastman, Harold Rosenberg, William Barrett, and others. According to Partisan Review co-editor William Phillips in an essay entitled Pure and Poor, the review published following authors in 1940, Leslie Fielder, Wiley Super, Hans Meyerhoff, Paul Bowles, Nicola Chiaramonte, Irving Howe, Isaac Rosenfield, Bernard Malamud, Vernon Watkins, Richard Ellman, Elizabeth Bowen, Joseph Frank, Tennessee Williams, E.E. Cummings, Milton Kloski, wow, Philip Toynbee,
Upton
Carl
Sinclair,
Shapiro, James Baldwin, Parker Tyler, Jose Luis Borges, Vladimir Nabokov, Carl Jaspers, Patricia Blake, Arthur Schlesinger, Angus Wilson, Nicola Tucci, Oscar Handlin, Diana Trilling, and Isaiah Berlin.
Eric Auerbach.
Not bad for a period of intellectual infantilism and debasement.
Yeah. That's impressive.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of dialogue just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I've been watching some of Isaiah Berlin's 78 philosophy interviews on the BBC. I think that's the same guy.
Kenneth, was it the Atlantic that he printed, published advertisements for his books? I think it was the Atlantic, but yeah, I don't think he got any sales off of it.
Yeah. Well, let's see what we can do about that. Now everybody gets their sales off of, Amazons, and you would like if people who bought this also bought that. Reviews. It's people just aren't reading those magazines the way they were.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a print culture anymore. Yeah, the only thing, if you want to get any traction at all, you would have to do online, and I would say YouTube or streaming podcasts.
Right.
Twitch.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's not going to be happening for him.
I just put that Isaiah Berlin link, Why Philosophy Matters.
Ah, I was looking for an essay like that. Yep, there it is. Thank you. Yay.